Hello, everyone. Tonight we're going to begin with the cold truth of medieval castles, how people actually slept inside them when winter pressed its palm against the stone. So before you get too comfortable, please like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, turn off the lights, maybe switch on a fan for that soft hum, and let's step into tonight's journey together. You cross a threshold of oak braced with iron, and the air changes at once. Torches a shiver along the passage, their light licking the rough lime wash, and the sound of your own boots seems larger than your body, a hard scraping over flagstones worn thin by centuries. Wind has an address in places like this. It comes to the door, puts its mouth to the crack, and whistles a note that doesn't stop. A castle looks romantic when you visit in June. In January, it becomes an argument with the weather. You discover quickly that the enemy you have to outwit is not a rival baron or a siege camp. It is the cold. Stone is the culprit and the savior. A wall 12 feet thick laughs at arrows and ignores battering rams. But it also treats warmth like a rumor. Heat from your small body presses into it and never comes back. At dusk, the temperature falls outside. Inside, it follows, dragging your breath behind it in little clouds. The corridors hold sound, but not heat. You can touch the wall and feel it refusing you. Cool even at noon, colder at night, always hungry. Medieval builders mastered defense, moats, drawbridges, arrow slits, murder holes. Comfort was an afterthought. They picked high, windy sites for the view and the advantage. Hilltops, where the North Sea air or Atlantic gusts learned to sharpen on the stone, a brilliant tactic when you need to see an army from 10 miles away, a curse when you only want to sleep. You think a big blaze will solve it, and there is one somewhere, the great hall's fire, tearing bright and defiant. But even that is a circle of mercy the size of a dinner table. Step away, and the warmth thins like broth. By the time you reach the stair, the cold has your ankles again. Climb the spiral, tight turns, narrow treads, and the draft lifts your cloak like a sail. In a chamber, the fire shrinks to a civilized flame, more light than heat. It ornaments the night, reddens your hands for a moment, and then betrays you to the room. The rest of the air is cellar cold. Travelers wrote about it without drama because that was the point. This was normal, not occasionally, not in freak storms, but as a feature of life. Frost inside chambers, basins where water froze to a pale disk, curtains that stiffened at the edges, beaded with tiny crystals from the sleeper's own breath. If you woke to a wall without rhyme in January, you were lucky or you were lying. People didn't stop sleeping. They learned the choreography of survival. As twilight fell, households practiced the same small engineering. Bank the hearth, shrink the living space, shut what could be shut, hang what could be hung, layer what could be layered. They built a little climate within the great stone climate, a nest against the weather inside the weather. There is a ritual to the walk across a winter chamber. You feel the damp in the flags under the rushes, smell the smoke that never truly leaves the rafters, hear the building talk to itself with little ticks and groans as the temperature drops. Somewhere a dog shifts and settles. Somewhere a guard changes feet on the wall walk, his spear knocking lightly against the parapet. If you stand still too long in your shirt, the cold finds seams you didn't know you had, cuffs, collar, the gap between glove and the sleeve. It is not a cinematic cold, it is work. You work to keep your heat. And if you stop, the cold goes on working. The bed is not furniture, it is a response. It stands high because the coldest air lies low, and it wears curtains because drafts are thieves. We will open those curtains later and step into that little weather. But for now, keep them drawn in your mind and notice what the bed represents. The castle cannot be warmed, so the sleeper must be. Each night is a negotiation. How much you can trap, body heat, breath, candle warmth, before the stone eats it. A modern house fights chill with systems. A medieval household fought it with habits. Every object that enters the scene, the rushes underfoot, the hangings on the wall, the wool on your shoulders, the cap over your ears, has a thermal job to do. It is tempting to imagine that rank settled all of this, that the Lord slept in velvet heat, while peasants gnawed on ice. The truth stings. A small cottage with a thatch fat with a straw. One fire, low ceilings, and too many bodies may keep warmth better than a stateroom built to impress. Grandeur is a drafty virtue. The higher you climb in a tower, the better the view and the thinner the air. Peasants learned a physics of closeness. Nobles learned a theater of display and paid for it each night. We will put these two worlds side by side later, but hold the irony for now. Sometimes the humblest huts kept winter out more effectively than the grandest walls, because the weather is not a backdrop in this story, it is a character. Nights in parts of Europe were long and cruel, and there were decades when winter bit harder than we're used to, then backed off, then returned with spite. On high ground, wind turns corners into pipes and arrow slits, which look dainty in photographs, behave like flutes for cold air. You can feel the architecture moving that air around you, urging it along passages, coaxing it through shutters, drawing it under doors. If the day has been wet, damp enters the room with you and sits there, patient and heavy. The most expensive item in the chamber, the tapestry, hangs not just to tell a story or impress a guest, but to interpose inches of wool between your breath and the wall. Stand here long enough and you learn to think like the people who lived this. You stop fantasizing about being warm everywhere, and you plan how to be warm somewhere. You count your steps from fire to bed and cheat the distance with a cloak. You rehearse the order, close the shutter, check the bar, pull the curtain, tuck the edge, cap the head, weight the feet. You become a conductor of tiny heats, candle, ember, breath, fur, blending them into something like comfort. Sleep is not a surrender. It is work you do before you close your eyes. When at last you lie down, the first truth of the castle announces itself through the mattress and into your bones. The stone beneath everything is not neutral. It has been keeping score all day, and now it takes its turn. Your toes ache before the blankets settle. Your fingers feel clumsy even as you tuck the cloth around your neck. The air inside the bed is better than the air outside, but it is not kind yet. You wait. After a minute, your breath writes its paragraph of warmth in the little space under the canopy, and you feel it in the softness of your face. It is astonishing how grateful a person can be for 2 degrees. Listen, the building speaks in winter. Drips fall in some unseen corner where condensation collects. The dog in the hall turns once, nails clicking, then is quiet. From the stair, there is the slow beat of someone climbing in a cloak, the watch, the nurse, the servant who banks the coals. None of these sound is friendly, none is hostile. They are simply the mechanics of a household surviving the dark hours. Historians write about lordship, tenure, rent, and fealty. They should sometimes write about this. The ordinary genius required to make a bed habitable in a stone room on a hill. We will take this night apart in the chapters to come. The great hall's brief blaze, the rushes that help and then betray you, the strange kindness of smoke, the bed as a tent, the heavy tact of wool and fur, the feather bed that swallows, the straw tick that scratches, the way dogs become radiators, the warming pan that comforts and sometimes burns, the candle's little heat and big risk, the shifting of rooms with the seasons, the watch over embers at midnight, the drinks that warm from the inside, the prayers and charms that warm the mind, the frost that blooms indoors, the inns where a stranger share a mattress, and the hearth that is both tyrant and savior. But it starts here, with the simple acceptance that castles are cold and sleep is something you build. Close your eyes to the torchlight. Feel the curtain's edge against your cheek, heavy with smoke and handling. Your breath thickens the air. The dog at your feet reassures you, and the wall beyond the hanging waits, unpersuaded. Somewhere the wind fingers an arrow slit and finds the note again. You will not beat the castle tonight. You will bargain with it. And if you have enough cloth, enough ritual, enough company, you will win a few hours, just enough to cross the dark. You make for the only room in the fortress that pretends to be kind. The great hall is a long inhale of light and noise, a blaze drawn into 4 walls, a place where cold loses its certainty. Trestle tables run like rafts on a black sea of flagstones, and the central hearth If the castle is old enough, or the end wall fireplace in a newer build throws a square of color that seems to move on the faces gathered near it. The hall smells like a life being lived quickly. Singed oak, roast fat, spilt ale, wet wool steaming as it dries, dogs whose patience lies exactly at floor level. Here, for an hour or two each winter night, heat is not an idea, but a fact you can hold your hands to. Rank arranges itself in circles around the flame. The nearer you sit to brilliance, the higher you're standing beyond the bright ring. The temperature drops and the jokes get forced. On the dais, a high table looks toward the fire and down the length of the room, power watching warmth. Carvers lean over trenchers, minstrels taste a tune, and in the screen's passage at the cooler end, servants slide in and out from pantry and buttery with a choreography so old it needs no speech. Everything here is designed to catch and expend heat. The bodies, the food, the laughter, and still the stone wins everywhere except right in front of the blaze. A log the size of a child goes on the fire with effort and ceremony. Somewhere in the accounts there is a line for this night's fuel: faggots brought from coppice, oaks from the Lord's woodland marked and felled, a cart wheel of charcoal hoarded for bitter weeks. Forests pay for warmth. A single winter can strip the hills like a poor harvest, and the steward grumbles numbers to himself even as the hall roars. Someone has to make the woodpile hold until Lent, and everyone knows it. Yet for the span of a meal, the reckoning pauses. Cups are replenished, pottage is ladled, knives ring against trenchers, and the fire licks back its lips. Heat is parochial. In a room like this, it keeps a parish about the size of a family. Step a few yards away and your breath fogs again. You can watch the physics. Faces on the bench are red to the cheekbones. The backs of those same people are cold as a stone. Heat climbs to the beams and lives there like a soot-stained ghost, thinking its lofty thoughts while you shiver below. In older halls, smoke seeks the louver in the roof. Sometimes it finds it, sometimes it doesn't, and the air becomes a moving argument between eyes and chimney. You wipe a tear you didn't mean to have. There's the strategy in gathering. A full hall is warmer than an empty one, and lords understand that feasting is both theater and heating policy. In the deepest months, household crowd the benches. Body warmth does its anonymous arithmetic, and the temperature rises a meaningful degree. You feel it most when the songs start to loosen, and the dogs decide there might be bones in this for them after all. For a while, there is something close to comfort. Someone passes a bowl of hot broth to a servant, and she closes her eyes for one grateful swallow. For a while, you forget the stair you must climb. All warmth here is temporary. All mercy has an end. The evening shrinks as candles gutter, and the steward judges the woodpile with a priest's conscience. The last course is a handful of nuts, or spiced wine that paints your throat in red sweetness and hums along your chest. Then the subtle dismantling begins. Minstrels pack their instruments. The household mutters its good nights to the Lord. Benches shiver back from the fire. There's always a moment when you can feel the hall turn from bright engine to dark room. A hinge in the night. The fire is still a color, but it is not ambitious now. Embers breathe more than blaze. You linger too long. Everyone does. You stand at the edge of the hearth until your shins smart and your calves know draft. You turn like a roast, offering each side of yourself to the blaze. It is a childish act and a wise one. Steal every degree you can carry. You know the walk that waits, the cold standing in the passage like a man who will not step aside, the austere like a well for winter, the door to your chamber which will not open quickly because the wood has swollen with damp. The worst shiver of the night, the one you will remember, is often that first one when you leave the hall and the heat unhooks its hand from yours. Listen to the acoustics as you step away. Laughter unthreads itself into the corridors and becomes lonely. The bark of a hound in the yard bounces against the inner curtain wall and returns as a new dog. Footsteps become official. The same architecture that magnifies a ceremony magnifies emptiness, and as a servant snuffs candles into darkness, the bubble of warmth collapses audibly. High above, smoke gathers in the hammer beam roof and will stay there like weather until morning. The scent will print itself on tapestries and linen, a memory that clings for years. Some households keep a bench by the hearth for the stubborn and the unlucky. A man asleep sitting up, cloak over his head. A girl on her side with her hands under her cheek, the way children sleep everywhere. A hound curled like a question mark. To fall asleep here is a theft of comfort from tomorrow's self. You will cough black in the morning and your eyes will sting. But tonight you have a pocket of summer the size of your own breath, and you will spend it. There are little technologies that pretend to help the hall do better than it can. A fireback of iron reflecting heat, tiles that hold warmth for a quarter hour longer, shutters along the screen's passage, pushed tight to choke drafts. In some places, a second hearth at the opposite end, fashionable, expensive, a pair to the first, makes a boast more than a difference. The cleverness is real, and yet the physics is still the landlord. You cannot ask a room with the volume of a small barn to be cozy in January. If you are a guest, you learn the etiquette of proximity, how far you're allowed into the ring of warmth, which stool is always reserved for the gouty uncle, what distance the Lord's little lapdog keeps for its own comfort so your boots do not find it. If you are a household, you learn the routes that least offend the cold, the path that runs with the wall, not across the room, how to time your walk to the buttery so you can shadow a man with a bowl of hot something and steal his steam. If you're the woman who keeps the keys, You know the cupboard where blankets live, and the other where they die. The hall gives you courage to attempt your bedchamber. That is its secret function. It reminds your skin what warmth feels like so that when you lose it, you still remember. You pull your cloak under your chin and take the first step into the passage. There's a knife edge of air waiting by the door. It slides along your wrists. A torch tests its flame against a draft and fails. It spits and sulks. The corridor bares its teeth in a stone. You count stairs, not superstitiously, but because numbers are steady when the air isn't. Third turn, ninth step, the little window that always whistles, the patch on the wall where a tapestry has been taken down to mend. And now there's only wall with its damp, telling you winter is inside as well as out. By the time your hand reaches the iron ring of your door, you have lost twice the heat you gained, but not all of it. Enough remains to make a beginning. You shove the swollen plank inward, and the room answers with its old cellar breath. Somewhere in there, coals banked low draw the smallest line of red, and beyond that, your tent of a bed waits with its animal patience. The hall has kept its promise, not to warm your chamber that is beyond it, but to give you a memory of warmth strong enough to work by. You cross the rushes. They rustle like dry grass in a winter field. Behind you, far down the passage, a servant touches a spark to wick, and a brief flower of light opens, then closes. Scholars will go on arguing whether later venting and clever flues improved halls by a little or a lot, whether fashion outpaced function or the other way around. The people who lived here did not argue. They adapted. They sat closer together in December than in May. They moved benches like chess pieces to intercept drafts. They held feasts large enough that the guests themselves became fuel. They let the poor crowd the outer ring and pretended it was charity, when in truth it was thermodynamics. Such is the medieval genius for survival. Turn necessity into ritual until it feels like grace. Close your eyes one more time at the threshold of your bedchamber, and you will hear it. The last laugh of the great hall dying into embers. The small courage that glow lends you as you step into cold. Tonight, you will need it. Every night you do, climb the stair and the castle changes its voice. Down in the hall, warmth talked in vowels, wide, open, generous. Up here, the consonants return, crisp, clipped, cold. Your palm grazes the wall at the landing and meets a truth you can't bargain with. Stone has a memory longer than winter. It remembers midnight at noon and January in April, 12 feet thick in places, ashlar faces with a rubble heart. It is perfect for stopping a quarrel or a ram. It is perfectly indifferent to your blood. If you have ever put your bare feet on a cellar floor in the morning and felt your day go lean, you already know this room. The paradox is obvious the moment you shut the door. Those defensive walls do everything except defend you from the weather. Their mass works against you. They absorb the rare, purchased heat and hold it deep, while the inner face continues to radiate the cold it hoarded all day. Air next to a stone cools, sinks, and slides along the floor. Slightly warmer air rushes in to replace it, and you have a draft made by physics rather than by gaps. Add to that the site, a keep on a ridge or a headland, because domination looks best from wind, and you begin to understand why breath clouds indoors. Architects thought in angles and fields of fire. Insulation did not appear on their parchment. You can hear the walls breathe, not with lungs, but with water. Moisture beads where your handprint fades, gathering to run in hair-thin streams that darken the lime wash. People wrote about it without surprise, the stones a sweat. One traveler noted, as if the room were a living beast dismayed by its own existence. In a wet winter, moss will green the inside of north walls. In a hard frost, the beads become a rash of crystalline lace. A basin set out for washing will seize into glass. Lift the bed curtain in the gray before dawn, and the cloth is crisp with rime at the hem. You think for a moment the hangings have been embroidered with silver during the night. Then you put your thumb to it, and the beauty melts on your skin. Every opening conspires, arrow slits, embrasures deeply splayed to widen the field of view, invite a blade of weather to pass unchallenged, even when shuttered. Spiral stairwells become chimneys, pulling air like lungs when wind crosses the roof. Garderobes, which vent through chutes to the outer air for reasons both sanitary and obvious, become expressways for drafts that creep in under their doors and skitter over the floor at ankle height. Even a proud new chimney, that sign of fashion and progress in a later century hall, can be your enemy upstairs. If wind backs down it, the room coughs smoke. If it draws too well, it hoovers the warm air out and sends it to the stars. So you build smaller worlds inside the big one. The bed sits raised on a dais, not for ceremony alone, but to rise above the coldest layer of air that puddles along the stones. The canopy is not a valance, it is a ceiling. Curtains pin to iron hooks and drop a wall of wool around your body. The fire in the hearth is narrow and stubborn, a red argument more than a victory, its heat collapsing into a tight circle on the rushes. 10 steps from the blaze, you may as well be outside. Turn your back to it and discover the medieval sensation nobody forgets. A face too warm, a spine that belongs to another climate. What can you do to the walls? You hang them. Tapestries are insulation that learn to tell us stories, woven of wool thick as a shepherd's advice. They carry hunts and saints and wars, but their purpose is also the air behind them. A hand's breadth of stillness trapped between cloth and stone is as real as an extra blanket. Servants heave the weight into place on pegs, and when you press your palm to the weave, you feel the faint animal scent of lanolin. a pastoral ghost enlisted in a siege against winter. Were they miracle workers, scholars, and stewards would answer differently. The steward, counting logs, knew the room felt calmer with the walls dressed. The scholar will tell you that heat leaves a space by roof and window and floor, and that wool on a wall is more comfort than cure. Both are right. Warmth is physics, endurance is psychology. The living use both. Where tapestries are too dear, boards go up. Wainscoting, oak panels pegged to battens, adds a rigid skin that traps air and keeps shoulders from leaning against damp lime. A fresh lime wash itself, bright as bone, does its quiet work. It breathes. It resists fungus. It reflects what little light the room consents to have. Fat-lipped draft snakes, rolls of rags and tow, get stuffed into window reveals. In some places, you find horn panes or oiled cloth stretched in frames, a translucent compromise that mutes the weather while letting through a yellowed day. In the richest chambers, small leaded quarries of glass sparkle like a religious promise, but they do not seal the world. They are a claim on comfort, not possession of it. Then there is the argument that never quite ends. Did the hangings and cloths and boards truly change the climate, or only the mind walk into a chamber newly dressed for winter, and even the skeptical will admit that it feels warmer? Whether the candle thermometer would agree or not, color matters. Crimson, blue, and green break the mental link between a stone and ice. Surface matters. Rough wool reads kinder to the hand than sweating lime. Sound matters too. Hangings catch the slap and echo, shortening the room, domesticating its voice. In these small changes, the mind finds permission to relax, and the body, finally allowed to unclench, discovers warmth it was hoarding. Still, most nights begin with a reckoning. You stand just inside the door and listen for the room's particular wickedness. Some chambers hiss at the arrow slits. Some moan around a loose lead cane. Some smell of damp oak from panels that have drunk air all week. If the fire is laid, you crouch and nurse it to life with breath. If it is not, you make the long walk back to the screen's passage to find a coal and a patient boy. The first flames turn the wall above the hearth into a little sunlit country. The red spreads, then fades, jerking back and forth with each log you feed it, as if warmth were a bird trying to decide where to land. There are places in the castle you learn to avoid on foul nights. The passages that run hard along outer curtains, the stair with its sly downdraft, the little oratory built into the thickness of the wall where prayer is heroic merely because the room is colder than honesty. There are places you hoard, the alcove where the wall bulges to cradle a settle, the window seat under the best shutter where two people can sit and be a separate weather. Microclimates become social facts. A page who knows where to stand when the Lord pauses to speak does not cough his future away. A laundress who hangs damp linen in the wrong corner will be scolded for making fog. It is easy to moralize from centuries away, to call this cruelty by design. But the people who lived here did not romance their own discomfort. They negotiated with it competently. Bedtimes became engineering, put heat in the room, stop air from moving, reduce volume, insulate the surfaces that can be tamed, accept that a stone is a sovereign you will never depose, then add meaning, pin a relic above the bed, not because wool needs saints, but because sleep does. Hang a cloth painted with vines to remind the eye of summer work, waiting beyond these walls when the year turns. Keep a posy of rosemary on the sill because the clean smells change a room faster than a coal ever could. And even with all that, some nights the walls win. You draw the curtain and the fabric rings faintly as frozen threads complain against one another. Somewhere inside the stone, a tiny pop answers, the sound of frost working its law inside a hairline crack. Your breath makes a private weather behind the cloth, and the linen at your lips damps and cools and damps again. In the great ledger the castle keeps, you have bought yourself a few degrees and a little courage. You will sleep, not because the walls were kind, but because you have built a smaller, wiser room within them. The first thing your boots tell you about the chamber isn't the cold. It's the sound, a dry whisper underfoot, a soft crackle that answers every step. The floor is not stone tonight. Not exactly. It's a meadow laid indoors. Rushes strewn thick across the flags to blunt the chill. Hush the echo and drink whatever the day has spilled. At a glance, it looks careless, but this mess is policy. A winter room needs a skin, and since no one can clad the earth in wool, they cover it with plants. Freshly laid, it almost feels like a joke the house is playing on winter. The stalks are still greenish at the root, smelling of riverbank and sun. Walk across them, and the air brightens with crushed sweetness. Meadow sweet, if they could get it, or sweet flag, maybe mint stripped from a kitchen border. Rosemary if the mistress is kind and the stores are generous. Herbs go in for reasons both practical and devout, to argue with the stench, to hearten the spirit, to persuade fleas and spirits alike to find another bed. For a night or two, you can pretend the indoors has seasons, but rushes keep two ledgers. In one, they are comfort. In the other, they are archive. Everything the room has lived through is recorded between their stalks. Grease from trenchers, drips of ale, ash shaken from gowns, a thread of wax fallen from the last candle, a child's cough laid down in phlegm and tread flat by the morning. Mice read this story with their whole bodies, so do beetles, and whatever else thrives on crumbs and warmth. You can banish drafts, but you will never evict hunger. By the time the moon has turned a handful of times, the meadow has become midden, and what you hear beneath you is no longer the crisp joke of summer, but a sudden accusation. Servants fight a war of attrition with brooms. They rake the worst of the top layer, change out the uppermost mat, if there's woven matting at all, and spread new rushes over the old. Rarely is the whole sea lifted. That is festival work, household upheaval work. More often it is patching, a fresh drift in the place where drinkers stand, a clean band by the hearth, new stalks under the trestles when guests are expected to notice. The rhythm shows up in accounts and in bodies. Those who tend floors learn to live with a bend in their backs in winter. Those who sleep in the room learn to keep their boots by the bed and never ever go barefoot to the door. Was it warmth? The argument starts in your shins and climbs as high as your patience. The physics is poor, heat rises, the cold pools along the stone. A few inches of plant do little to change the climate of a hall, but it does change the life of the feet that live there. Stone is a thief of heat by touch as much as by air. Rushes interpose. They pad the punishments, soften the throb of a day's standing, and strip the sheen off a room's hardness. If you sit low, if you sleep along the floor, the difference is moral, not merely measurable. A peasant child folded into a cloak on the rushes near a kitchen hearth is not warmer because of botany alone. She is warmer because she is not on a stone. And for damp, the benefit is plain. The walls sweat, the air beads, water finds the lowest chance. Without the meadow, the flags would slick and treacherous. The chamber, a cistern that never tips. With it, the room can pretend a little longer. The price is paid in filth. Somewhere between winter and the spring, the floor becomes a compost heap that clothes itself like a carpet. The house chooses when to tell the truth. At Easter, at a wedding, when new lords come. The room is stripped to bone and the record is thrown to the midden, a year of living carted out in barrows. There are manners to learn. Do not drop bones where you sleep. Do not hide fish spines in the sweet flag and think the cat will make the story end there. Shake crumbs into the dog, not into the floor. You will not win against mice, but you can at least decide which wars you lose. The rushes teach you to walk differently. You learn to feel for cups half buried, to nudge aside a sprig of rosemary with the toe of your boot and see what lies under it. Even the music of the room changes. The crackle swallows a step. You can come close to someone without echo announcing you. Privacy, such as it is in a castle, starts with what sound the floor will allow. Status asserts itself, as it always does, by thickness and by choice. In a poor chambered strewing is whatever was cut near the marsh the day the weather allowed. In a rich one, there are bundles chosen for scent as much as for structure. In some houses, a woven reed mat lays first like a raft, then the loose rushes, then the herbs, a sandwich that says, in its layers, we can afford to do this twice. In the presence chamber, winter might bring carpet, imported, hoarded, shown to guests like plate, but even then a strip of rush is laid where peasant feet must stand, so the carpet need not know their mud. You kneel and pinch a stalk, and it splits with a wet pop. The juice that stained your fingers when the rushes were new is gone now. What bleeds is gray. You take a breath, and the room tells a history your eyes will not admit. Smoke first, always, then wool, which is not a scent so much as the memory of shelter. Then the muddy bottom of the river where the rushes grew. After that come the days, ale, onions, tallow, sweat, grease, the sweet stab of mint that someone spread yesterday to pretend a corner is new. You had wanted the room to smell like church, beeswax and cold as stone. But church is for an hour and this is for a life. Still, the meadow does good work beneath its sins. It breaks the arrogance of a stone. It speaks in a softer voice than teal. In a storm, when the wind presses its whole face against shutters and the chimney chooses to put you in a low cloud, the rushes muffle the rain's enormous hands. The bed curtain teaches you that small rooms are warmer. The floor teaches you that small sounds are kinder. And if you are made to sleep there, on a pallet or under a cloak, there is a minor miracle to learn. Heat will collect in the rugged hills and valleys the rushes make, and your body will find those hollows as if it had made them on purpose, which, after a night or two, it has. There are critics even while there are beneficiaries. A tidy mind hates to lose a floor. A clean one can barely endure. In some places, reform arrives in the form of boards and sweepable surfaces. In others, in the simple insistence that what is strewn must be renewed more often and with less generosity to mouse and mite. You can hear reform when a house breathes differently underfoot, less whisper, more knock, but reform brings its own winter. Bare boards take the sting out of refuse and teach the nose new manners. They give the cold a clear path back to skin. A winter ritual grows from all this that is logistical and, strangely, liturgical. The men bring in great armfuls from the yard where the rushes dry. The women break the herbs and lift their faces to the scent. Children steal stalks to sword fight until a skull's look returns them to duty. The room changes under human hands, which is the point as much as comfort is. You cannot change the sky, but you can make a floor. When the last bundle is shaken and patted flat, someone stands in the doorway and nods, and for an hour everyone believes they have done something to time. By midnight, the river has come inside. Your boot finds the comfort in it without thinking. Your ear finds the quiet. Your nose resigns itself to the truth. You swing your legs out of the bed to reach for a chamber pot, and the first shock is less cruel because your feet discover plant before they find a stone. A ridiculous victory measured in heartbeats, but a heart beats in heartbeats. You slide back under the blankets and listen to a mouse hold court beneath the table and, absurdly, forgive it because you too are sheltering in a straw. Tomorrow, The rushes will hide more secrets. A ring dropped in laughter, a piece of bark that fell from a log and refused to burn, the husk of a walnut, a dog's discouraged flea. In spring, the room will confess all this and be absolved with carts and fresh cuttings. But tonight, the floor keeps your toes from remembering the river in the stone. That is enough. In a castle that will never be warm, you learn to accept the small, honest mercies, a cushion of plant, a whisper instead of echo, the memory of green between you and the earth's long cold. You sit on the edge of the bed and realize the castle's slyest weapon against the night isn't a stone or fire, it's cloth. Not one blanket, not two, but a strata, fiber layered on fiber until a sleeper becomes a bundle with a heartbeat. Linen sits nearest the skin, cool when first touched, quick to accept warmth, plain enough to launder. Over it comes wool, the workhorse of winter, thick and faintly greasy with the ghost of lanolin, and above that the proud, almost living weight of fur. Once you learn the order, you stop thinking of a bed as furniture and start thinking of it as the climate you assemble. The linen tells its own practical story. Of all the fabrics in the room, it alone will see the washtub often. It can be scalded, beaten, wrung, and, miracle of miracles, emerge cleaner than it went in. Heavier textiles must be aired, not washed, for the simple reason that water clings to them like a vow. So households husband linen jealously. Inventories note sheets by number and by condition. A torn hem means a winter argument. A stain that won't leave means a servant's apology. You slip under such linen, and it kisses the skin with that faint crispness only flax can manage. The whisper of a field in summer, even as the room smells of a smoke and damp stone. Then the wool, lay one blanket and the body relaxes. Lay a second and the mind does too. Lay a third and mobility becomes an opinion. Wool itches at the edges, your wrist, your neck, the place where the sheet rides up. But its gift is simple. It traps what you make. The heat you spend doesn't go far. It gathers like counsel and returns to you. A servant jokes, not softly, that his lord needs a page to turn him at midnight. The truth behind the joke is familiar to anyone who has slept under a winter stack. Weight is security, and security is a burden gladly accepted. Fur is different. It answers the cold with silence. Where wool keeps a conversation going between skin and air, fur stops the talk entirely. The pelt looks like luxury because it is, but also because it works. Seal the edges and the air you warmed stays where you begged it to stay. Marten, squirrel, fox, lambskin, it depends on purse and pride. In northern houses, ermine is a boast, sable an empire draped across a mattress, even sheepskin, humble, thick, smelling faintly of field and pen, turns a bed from suffering into strategy. You lift a fur coverlet and the scent rises, not perfume, not cleanliness, but animal presence, musky and honest. There are nights when that smell feels like a second companion. People make theories to match their experience. You hear it across tables and in winter corridors. Linen cools, wool warms, fur seals. So the sandwich is born. Linen next to the body to draw moistness away. Wool above to make heat. Fur on top to trap the making. Whether the physicians agree or not, the sleepers do. A woman who has seen too many winters will insist upon it, with the dignity of one who has survived. The bed becomes a layered argument with the night, and the folk wisdom wins more evenings than it loses. Bedding reveals rank, the way everything does. A poor girl's pallet might have one thin sheet, if any, and a single coarse blanket pebbled with knots. A middling household has a chest of linen, patched, yes, but counted and mended, and 2 good blankets that get their sunning on clear days. A lord's chamber lists coverlets like plate, one of vair, one of miniver, one of fox, 2 quilts of scarlet cloth stuffed with carded wool, sheets fine and fair. The distinction is not merely for show. A winter of sleeping under fur is a different winter than one slept under one threadbare length of rough wool. But the economy of warmth cuts curious ways. A peasant family huddled together under one heavy blanket may wake warmer than a lord stretched alone beneath 5. Cleanliness walks on a knife edge. Linen can be boiled. Wool can only be beaten, brushed, and trusted to the wind. Fur is worse. It wants air and cold to sweeten it, not water. So beds are in negotiation with mites and fleas, especially if the first layer on the frame is a straw tick that has seen too many seasons. You see the management written into habit. In the morning, hang back the covers and let steam escape. On days of sun, strip the bed and carry pelts to the gallery. Make the wind your laundress. Beat the tick, turn it, add straw. Mark the calendar for the spring when new stuffing will be begged from the steward. Trade runs through the covers like thread. A blanket fullered on a local millstone feels different than one woven in a town where the clothiers are famed for tight weave and dense nap. Furs have their geographies too. Squirrel and marten from northern forests, beaver from colder rivers, lamb and sheepskin from nearer fields, ermine when the purse wants to speak Latin. The bed is an atlas if you know how to read it, a map of what a household can command from the world. In that sense, warmth is not only a temperature, it is a web of roads, barges, hunts, taxes, and hands. Hands, always hands. Consider how many work to lend you this hour of tolerable sleep. Spinners twist flax that later kisses your shoulder. Weavers beat wool until a blanket is born. Tanners and furriers make what once ran through snow into what now keeps you from dreaming of snow. Fullers stomp or mill the cloth until it thickens. The laundress scalds and wrings until her knuckles bloom raw. The page who tugs the covers tight has learned the precise tug that makes a corner hold. Winter sleep is a communal labor presented to a single body as a gift. Touch changes with each layer, Linen is a cool page, wool, a weight that edits your breathing, fur, a hush. When you shift under all three, sound changes. Linen rustles, wool sighs, fur barely speaks. The senses write the night in a different grammar than the day. Smell, too, composes its own text. Linen, again, is hope, soap if the house has it, sun if not. Wool carries the chorus of sheep and a smoke. Fur carries the animal, but in winter the animal is comfort, a memory of pulse. If that feels unromantic to say, wait until the cold makes philosophy irrelevant. There is ritual here that is almost liturgy. The bed is made as a priest makes an altar. The bottom sheet pulled tight like a vow, the corners mitered or pegged, the blanket shaken so the nap points down and the wind cannot crawl through the weave. The fur is spread last and smoothed, as if fear itself had creases that needed the palm. A small bolster waiting for the neck, perhaps a border cloth across the foot, decorative and practical, to keep boot leather from soiling what the laundress labored to bleach. When all is done, the curtains are drawn and the climate holds. To slip inside is to understand why wait was a kind of love. It is difficult to turn with honor, but turning is not the point. The bed has become a boat, and you are ballast. The stability is warmth. You lie still, and the layers begin to do arithmetic. Breath warms linen. Wool multiplies it. Fur refuses to let the sun escape. Outside, the draft tries the edge of your curtain with two cold fingers. Inside, the cloak of the natural world, plant and animal, takes your side. Of course, the system has enemies. Too much fur and you wake sweating, your throat raw from a night of breathing damp. Too little wool and your knees ache with a pain older than your years. Sheets slip in the night and you wake with a forearm on bare blanket, certain that you could identify wool with your eyes closed at 1,000 paces. Somewhere between suffocation and shiver is the balance each household learns as surely as it learns its prayers. Occasionally, the logic of status defeats the logic of survival. An heirloom coverlet heavy with embroidery looks magnificent and insulates poorly. A fur too delicate for nightly use is guarded like relics, while the sleeper shivers beneath lesser cloth. And then there are the proud who refuse to admit they have grown old and need an extra layer. Pride is as treacherous as any draft. Still, when the covers are right, you feel it at once. A small pocket of consent opened between body and world. You have built a room inside a room using nothing that burns. You close your eyes and hear, faintly, the ticks a straw settling, the wolves whisper, the dog resettling at your feet, the curtain's hem brushing your cheek with the weight of one frozen drop it caught and kept from you. The stone can have the wind. You will take the cloth. The bed is not furniture tonight. It is a device, wood and rope and fabric arranged to manufacture a pocket of weather kinder than the room that holds it. Step close, and you see the logic made visible. 4 stout posts like small trees. a carved canopy above, the tester, and from it curtains that fall on every side. Draw them, and you've made a tent inside a fortress, a small republic of breath and warmth with borders you can police. Everything about the four-poster is practical first, splendid second. The frame rises high for a reason. Cold settles lowest, pooling on a stone like water. Lift the sleeper, and you rise above the coldest layer. Between the rails a lattice of cords is threaded and tightened with a wooden key, each twist pulling the sacking bed taut so that a straw tick or feather mattress won't bow and swallow you whole before midnight. If you listen, you can hear the cords creak softly when you sit. If you press your palm to the tester, you feel the sturdiness that lets the curtains hang without gaping. The curtains themselves do the real work. Wool serge if you're prudent, fine worsted or velvet if you must display it, lined where possible, so that weave meets weave and drafts lose heart between the layers. Many households stitch an inner facing of plain cloth and reserve the costly stuff for the eye. Some line edges with oiled linen or brush the fabric with wax, a compromise that stiffens the drape but turns cloth into a windbreak. Drawn fully, the curtains don't make heat. They trap what your body and bedding have already earned. Within minutes, the air changes feel, the bite dulls, breath fogs less, the skin stops flinching. Look for small engineering that rarely makes it into poems. A valance runs under the tester to keep hot air from leaking out where curtain meets canopy. Ties and loops let you pin back one panel while you do the night's tasks. Say a prayer, drink a warming cup, then loose it again without fumbling. A narrow slit may be left on the hearth side to admit a thread of firelight while keeping the draught at bay. If the household is careful, a bed staff, a smooth rod, leans nearby to push sheets and blankets into tight corners, sealing the edges so the cold cannot ambush your feet before dawn. The canopy spreads more than warmth. It spreads authority. Hangings carry devices and beasts, family colors and pious scenes, Annunciation lilies, hunting stags, vines that promise Eden in wool. The bed is a stage set as much as a shelter. People are born here, blessed here, negotiated with here, and in due time, farewelled here. A visitor received on the edge of the mattress reads the household's fortunes in a glance. The depth of the mattress, the nap of the cloth, the patient mending at the hem. Yet beneath the heraldry hums a mobile practicality. Beds travel, poles come apart, testers lift down, pegs and cords rattle into chests. On progress or pilgrimage, a noble might arrive with his own sleeping weather packed on a cart. A French duchess, one traveler notes with some awe, refused to pass a single night without her accustomed bedstead and hangings. Servants knew the drill, posts up, cords laced, tester set, curtains hung, and by dusk a strange chamber became home. Even lesser folk borrow the idea. In timbered cottages of the far west, you find box beds built into walls. The principle of enclosure turned to carpentry, so the sleeper slides behind wooden doors. The impulse is the same, a climate within a climate. Not everything in the microclimate is benevolent. Warm breath meets cold fabric and leaves its mark. By first light, the curtain where your lips faced it may feel stiff, etched with delicate crystals. On ugly nights, a smoke finds its way under the canopy and sits with you. You wake dry-throated and blinking. The little tent become a sensor. And privacy, what luxury it is. What danger. A candle set too near can turn the night into ruin. Households drill the habit into pages' bones. Flame away from hangings. Pan kept moving when warming the sheets. Embers doused before any curtain is drawn. Scholars will argue as scholars do. Were these enclosed beds true heaters, or chiefly a comfort to the mind? A theatrical improvement that persuaded the body to feel warmer than it was? The answer is likely the one you can feel with your own hand. Stand 2 paces from the hearth and the air grips you. Slip behind thick cloth and your skin loosens its fist. Perception and degree are not enemies in winter. They ally. A pocket that feels safe lets the body unclench, and an unclenched body keeps its warmth. Beneath your shoulder blades, the mattress tells another chapter. On rope-bottom frames, a straw tick lies first, a buffer against cords and a way to keep the dearer featherbed clean. Above that, if the purse allows, a sack of goose down swallows your angles and returns them as hum. Each layer partners with the curtains. The straw keeps the underside dry. The down hoards heat. The hangings cage the whole weather system, so the numbers finally add in your favor. A small bolster nudges the neck. A footcloth guards the sheets from boots you did not remove because the flagstones bit your bones. Listen to the small society of the bed. From under the frame, the truckle slides, narrow, low, where a child, page, or maid will sleep. Proximity is warmth and service both. Their breathing adds degrees you will not acknowledge out loud. On the outer side, a dog, barred from the sheets, but not far off, settles with a complaint and becomes a radiator wrapped in fur. The bed is rarely solitary in a winter castle. The microclimate is communal even when curtained. Textiles make weather, wood remembers it. Beds take on the seasons like trees do. In drought-dry months, the joints click. In damp, they swell until pegs stick and the tester answers your touch with a duller note. Good carpenters know to leave the right tolerance, and good households know to keep the frame aired on clear days. Even a bed can mildew if made a tomb. There is a rhythm to entry. A servant turns down the coverings and lays the pillows right. If the house is cautious, a warmed stone wrapped in cloth goes to the foot, where numb toes will hunt it. You extinguish the room light, slip inside, and reach for the inner cord. One tug, and the last panel falls. The sound is soft and ceremonial. Air inside still carries smoke and wool, but it is your air now, owned, changed by your presence. A minute later, you can feel the circle close. Another small, visible triumph, where the curtain brushes the bed rail, a line of frost has formed on the wood outside the cloth. The cold arrested right there, on that edge. Not all beds are equals, even when their hangings seem kin. A state bed in the presence chamber is theater of power more than weathercraft, slept in rarely, intended to be a scene. The working bed in the solar bears repairs like honorable scars and has no need to impress anyone who is not cold. You will know which is which by the smell. Beeswax and new dye in the first, sun-baked wool and aired feathers in the second, and still the bed teaches humility. Some nights the cold is an adversary, even curtains respect. Wind prowls the floor, finds the hem, fingers the gap. Your body negotiates again, change nothing and endure. Open a panel a finger's width to let the hearth's last glow in. Pull the fur higher and admit you will trade breath's ease for stillness. These are not grand choices, but they are the choices that winter understands. In the morning, the ritual reverses. The inner cord lifts, the panel slides, the world floods in, loud and wide and cold. Steam unwinds from blankets. A servant pins back the cloths to let damp escape. The bed, briefly a tent, becomes architecture again. If there is sun, hangings are spread a little so their nap can drink light. Linen is peeled away to the chest, ready for the laundress who will wage her own war with January water. The tester, relieved of all that cloth, looks for a moment like scaffolding the skeleton of last night's warmth. You will not bless the stone today. You will bless the thing that outwitted it. The bed remembered your heat and insisted upon it, gave it walls and a roof and a rule of law. In a castle that can keep an army out but cannot keep winter from sitting down to supper. This is no small feat. Draw the curtains tonight, and you will step into the weather you made with your own breath, and you will sleep not by grace of walls, but by craft of wood and cloth. The fortress did not save you. The little tent inside it did. Tonight, the surest heater is not wood or wool, but other breathing bodies. In a stone chamber, solitude bleeds warmth into the walls. Company lays it back upon you. The habit is older than etiquette and far stronger than pride. Beds, those little weather shelters of posts and cloth, are rarely solo performances in winter. If you peeled away the curtain of any working chamber and looked with honest eyes, you would find people sleeping as they lived, in layers. Start with rank and proximity. A lord's bed, monumental as it is, does not stand alone. Beneath it, the truckle pulls out low, narrow, and easy to slide away at dawn. A page or maid sleeps there, close enough to answer a whispered summons, close enough that their body heat counts for a degree or two inside the curtained climate. In some houses, a favored esquire lies on a pallet at the bed's foot. In others, a nurse settles a child there. the rhythm of the master's breath and the nearness of fire, serving as a lullaby and guard. Everyone knows the excuse is service. Everyone knows the dividend is warmth. Marriage itself is an economy of heat. Two bodies under one heap of blankets make a bigger hearth than one. The child pulled between them, swaddled to stiffness and tucked hard against a mother's belly, becomes a coal that never rolls off the grate. Beds are for heirs and alliances, yes, but in winter they are also for survival. Miniatures in illuminated books show couples in long linen shirts and caps, lying cheek by cheek with curtains drawn. It reads as piety and modesty. It also reads as sense. Linen spares the sheets. Caps spare the warmth. Closeness spares the rest. Listen for the house's truth on a bitter night. Far off, a door thuds. Nearer, the bed curtain rings ever so slightly as someone slips in. There's that shy laugh, the quick hissed hush, the reshuffling of covers, and then the long exhale as two kinds of weather mingle and become more bearable. This is not romance as tales polish it, though romance happens here too. It is a domestic physics every class understands. Heat multiplies, drafts lose their nerve. Not every household admits bed sharing from the door. Among the high propriety posts its sentries. A countess sleeps with her ladies in a neighboring chamber, not on her canopy's mattress. A lord keeps only his page within hand's reach, and even that with a screen or a curtain's breadth between. Yet letters and wills pull aside the gauze. A bequest grants a place near the chamber fire at night to a squire who has earned favor. Another instructs that the old retainer is to be lodged where warmth is sure. A courtesy, yes, and a confession. Warmth has a rank of its own. Lower the gaze to other rooms, and the ritual stops pretending it is anything but common sense. In a steward's chamber, two apprentices roll out a straw tick and sleep shoulder to shoulder, cloaks over both, boots still on. In the laundry loft, maids nest three to a pallet, the last to bed tucking the edge tight with a practiced knee. Children crowd together like kittens. A grandmother is granted the warm side near the hearth's flank, and no one disputes it because mercy is a house rule that does not need writing. Bed sharing breeds inconveniences the household accepts as the tax for heat. Fleas travel, whispers travel further. The secret you murmur at midnight may be common coin by noon. Someone snores like a cart on cobbles. Someone steals the covers with the greed of a king. Someone's cough keeps time you did not ask for. Yet when wind prowls along the floor and January makes knives of the keyholes, these become bearable vices. Better the itch, better the rumor, better the thunderous snore than the clean dignity of freezing alone. You can chart the practice's politics by who gets invited into the curtain's weather. A guest honored beyond his station is told, "You will lie in my chamber," and the words mean esteem and warmth at once. A servant disgraced is sent to a cold loft on the north wall, a punishment you can feel in your teeth. Hospitality is measured in inches from the fire and in how many bodies you are allowed to borrow for the night's arithmetic. Even within a marriage, distance can be made of cold. Spouses quarrel, two pillows are set further apart. The bed that was a hearth cools to separate embers under the same fur. Reconciliation is as simple and as difficult as rolling back toward heat. Custom is particular. In some places, travelers are laid down side by side with strangers at inns and think nothing of it. In others, household servants form their own thick braid of sleep, while masters insist on a hedge curtain, screen, or space between themselves and any other breath. Monks, soldiers, apprentices, their dormitory nights will come later in the tale. Here in Chambers, the rule is a different compromise. Closeness, kept at whatever line the house draws, privacy, punctured just enough to let survival in. You can feel the choreography when two or three arrange themselves under the same cover. Feet find the hot stone at the bed's end and negotiate who holds it first. A back presents itself as a wall, and a second body settles into its curve. An arm reaches and then thinks better of it. The hand retreats to the safer diplomacy of a shared blanket edge. The last to lie down is the night's mason, sealing the drafts with cloth, weighting the corners, tucking the hem like mortar into a gap. Within minutes, air thickens with breath and the geography decides itself, a peninsula of warmth with well-defended coasts. Etiquette grows out of practice. You turn with the sheet, never against it. You warn before you leave the bed so no one startles and breaks the cocoon. You do not bring a naked candle into another's weather unless you like waking to smoke and panic. If you rise to tend the fire between first sleep and second, you slide back through the curtains feet first. So the gust you import is small, and your face is not the first thing the cold greets. Animals cross the threshold between tool and companion here. We will speak of hounds at length, but even where a dog is not admitted to the mattress, it is permitted the foot of the bed or the rug beside. A beast's sleep has its own warmth, and its nearness reassures in a way that embers cannot. A low sigh, a thump of tail, the sudden soft heat against your toes when you had misjudged the blanket's reach. Cats, ratters by day, discover they are wanted at night and take payment in a square of blanket at a shin level. You put up with the hair and the paw in the ribs because the alternative is the kind of cold that makes wit cruel. There are hazards to the company you keep. Sharing spreads illness the way it spreads heat. A winter cough passes from mouth to mouth along the bed's curve. By week's end, the whole household keeps the same rhythm. Physicians scold and then advise what households already do. Open a panel at dawn. Air the bedding when the sun shows its face. Beat the mattresses in clear weather. And, if you can afford it, rotate sleepers so damp doesn't find the same corner every night and make a little swamp of it. The bed is a republic that needs maintenance. Stories, as always, sharpen what they touch. A late tale laughs at an Italian guest who begs for a separate bed in Burgundy and then spends the night shivering, while the servant boys across the rushes to a pallet. Noses pressed together like lit coals snore in perfect comfort. Another tells of a proud young knight who insisted on dignity and kept his own chamber, only to be found in the morning sleeping on a bench in the great hall, boots toward the dying fire, dignity surrendered for heat. The moral writes itself, and the house remembers. If you stand outside a drawn curtain and listen, you hear not a scandal, but citizenship. A murmur, a blanket ferried from one to another, a shared joke that doesn't need words, the soft knock of knuckles on bed rail when someone, half asleep, reaches to be sure another is still there. It is easy to make philosophy of this, to say that winter teaches community, that the stone makes communists of lords and peasants alike between Vespers and Prime. It is also simply true in the body. Cold punishes separation. Warmth rewards company. At first light, the evidence is everywhere. 3 indentations where there might have been one, a little crescent of dog hair where a hound made a moon at your feet, the warm, wet smell of shared breath lingering under the canopy. A child crawls out and makes a steam in the air with his laughter. A maid slips the truckle back under with the ease of 100 mornings. Someone coughs, someone blesses themselves, someone says they dreamt of orchards because the bed was hot at last. The household's day begins not with one person's rested ease, but with many people's workable sleep, one in consortium against the walls. The castle remains a refrigerator. The night remains an adversary. But the bed, with its little society assembled, has done what the stone cannot, multiplied warmth by consent. When the cold comes back at dusk, and it will, you will draw the curtain and gather your citizens again, spouse or child, page or maid, hound or cat, the necessary quorum. You will lie close, not for love alone, though love may come, but for law, the old law of winter that says, we live warmer together than apart. What you wore to bed mattered as much as what you slept beneath. In a world without thermostats or sealed windows, clothing became the last wall you carried on your skin, the difference between a tolerable night and the slow leak of heat into a stone. People did not undress for sleep as we imagine it. They armed themselves softly with linen and wool. Begin with the simplest piece, the long night shirt, the same garment that by daylight would be called a smock or shift for women, a shirt for men. Linen, always linen if the house could possibly afford it. Not because linen is warm, it isn't, but because it can be boiled, scoured with lye, beaten clean at a trough, and it dries faster than wool in a land where nothing dries. Body linen is the first thing laundered when fuel and labor allow. It sits closest to the skin, becomes the memory of a sweat and a smoke, and must be renewed if anything in the room is to smell briefly of river and soap. Over that plain, cool foundation, warmth is negotiated. In deep winter, you do not trust the bed alone. You tug on a second layer, a woolen kirtle or tunic loosened for the night, or you draw a short mantle around the shoulders, a chamber robe whose whole purpose is to keep the first shiver from setting its claws in your back while you cross that short Arctic from hearth to mattress. Hose stay on, or at least footcloths are bound about the arches and toes, strips of wool wrapped like a soldier's puttees, tied with a practiced hand, the knuckles remembering last winter's ache. Some households keep a basket of these by the bedpost, the way we keep slippers by a door. Then the head. Every picture book of the age knows the truth. Sleepers wear caps, a small linen coif tied beneath the chin, a soft hood with its tail liripipe flung forward. Sometimes, for ladies, a kerchief folded twice and pinned so it will not work loose. Most heat escapes through the skull, say the old sayings, and though the physic of it is more complicated, anyone who has stood bareheaded in a courtyard in January knows the intuition is correct enough. In bed, the cap does quiet work. It dampens the whisper of drafts, keeps sweat and oil from the pillows you cannot launder weekly, hushes the room's noises as if modesty itself had a sound. Not every garment is purely practical. Rank advertises itself even in darkness. A lord's nightshirt may be edged in a narrow band of embroidery, pretty as a secret. A lady's chemise, fine enough to ghost her hands when she raises an arm to blow out the candle. Fur-lined night gear exists, the winter indulgence of lining a hood or edging the opening of a chamber gown with miniver or squirrel. It is warmth that announces itself when the curtain parts. But even here, fashion bends to function. A jewel on a cuff is a hazard by firelight, and a trailing ribbon that looks charming at supper will snare like a fishhook in the dark. Night clothes learn humility quickly. There is an etiquette to this dressing for sleep, made from modesty and necessity in equal shares. People share beds, they share chambers, servants step through with braziers and pans. Children creep in at midnight. To lie naked is to invite talk and drafts. To lie in linen and cap is to spare both. Illuminated margins show couples in their shirts, saints tucked up to the chin, even merry sinners tangled under covers still wearing something on their heads. Piety, perhaps more surely, propriety and a very practical respect for the bite of air. The ritual continues with extremities. A medical writer tells you to rub the feet with warm oil. A grandmother tells you to wind a band of wool round your wrists and neck. You obey both. Fingers and toes lose arguments with frost first. So you make mitts of cloth without thumbs. Just tubes that trap heat, but still let you tend a candle or pull a log on the coals. You bind the ankles in soft strips. You keep a rag by the bed to tie over the nose and mouth when the wind is in the east and the room's air hurts to breathe. You go to ground like a soldier, but gently. Laundry governs what can be spared to the night. Linen is scoured on set days. In noble houses by laundresses with vats and paddles. In cottages at the river when the weather allows a bare-armed battle with ice. Winter washing is a smaller, riskier. So a shirt might be worn longer than comfort allows, turned at the neck, mended invisibly, and sent back into service because fresh cloth costs dearer than patience. Linen is the ledger's honesty, wool is its wisdom. Wool insulates even when damp, so you forgive its smell of lanolin and sheepfold, and bless it when the bed's first shock subsides faster under a coarse blanket thrown across your shoulders before you lie down. Monks and nuns make a different covenant with the cold. In many houses, they sleep in their habits, belt loosened, cowl up a rule of readiness for prayer, and a shield against the draft that prowls the dormitory from the high windows to the tile floor. Their austerity is warmth of another sort, the heat of numbers, the rhythm of shared breath, the trust that obedience itself wards off a little of the night's malice. Soldiers on campaign do the same without the prayers. Cloak for blanket, saddle for pillow, boots never truly off, because frozen leather at dawn is a curse you only need to learn once. Peasants adapt with the same intelligence, just fewer choices. A man comes in from the yard and loosens his belt. His shirt is his nightshirt because there is only the one. He dries it by the fire, turns it, dries it again, and the steam smells of a smoke and ox and cold breath. A woman's shift is patched at the gussets where a strain lives, darned where a straw has fretted it. She keeps a kerchief on her hair because modesty is a habit, and warmth a reason that does not need a speaking. Children go to sleep in what they played in, the little caps askew, a smear of bread at a corner of the mouth, a peal of laughter making a steam in the air when someone's bare foot finds the hot stone at the mattress end. Debate happens in the margins of the age just as it does at our dinner tables. Did most people have nightwear, as we would name it, or did they simply sleep in their day linen? The inventories name nightshirts often enough in wealthier rooms to make the category real. The silence in poorer records speaks its own thrift. But whether the garment has a name or not, the technique is the same. Keep clean cloth next to the skin if you can, wool above it, wrap the head, bind the edges where drafts slip in, and do not skimp the feet. The choreography of getting into bed is part clothing, part a strategy. You stand by the hearth long enough that warmth sinks bone deep through the layers. Then you cross the cold stones with purpose, lift the curtain with a wrist, and let only your legs slide in first, keeping the cap snug, the chest wrapped, so you do not invite the room's entire winter under the covers ahead of you. Once inside, covers up. Then and only then do you shrug the chamber robe off the shoulders and pull it in after you to lie like another blanket on top. It is a small trick, learned the hard way and taught in one sentence by anyone who has ever slept in a tower. This is where ornament gives way entirely to sensation. The linen is cool at first and faintly rough. It softens against the skin as your heat finds it. The wool above it is heavy, a reassuring compress that quiets a day's fretful thoughts. The cap presses your ears and makes the world less sharp. The bark in the yard dims. The shout on the stair loses its edge. You smell tallow and ash and something green still clinging to the herbs in the rushes. Your hands, wrapped in their tubes of cloth, find the other body's sleeve or the dog's flank and know, without words, that the night's arithmetic will work. Clothes have a way of keeping counsel with belief, a charm stitched into a hem, a cross sewn small where only you know it lies, a sprig of rue tucked in the cap's fold, insurances against what cold cannot explain. They weigh nothing, cost little, and calm the mind as surely as another blanket calms the shiver. When the candle is snuffed, your fingers sometimes rise to the cap's tie and check it's not in the dark. Not because it will fail, just because the gesture says, we have done what we can. Now let sleep do the rest. At dawn, the proof is on the linens. A faint ring where breath met cold and left rime. Oil dark smudges at the heels where wool greeted skin. A loosened stitch where a turning body tugged too hard. Servants will warm their hands over a brazier and get to work. Shake, air, mend, fold. The house changes clothes as the people do. By noon, if there is sun, sheets hang like flags from a gallery, white, moving, miraculous for an hour in their promise of clean. By vespers, they are back on the bed, and the cycle turns again. The night is patient, so are you layer by layer, knot by knot until a spring. By the time you're dressed for sleep and the curtains are half drawn, there's still one last rite before surrendering to the dark. The small ceremony that decides whether the first minutes in bed are mercy or punishment. You hear it before you see it. The faint clink of a lid, the grit-soft rattle of embers, a hinge that protests in a whisper. Then the servant appears with a long-handled pan, brass belly dulled by years of fire, tiny perforations punched in floral patterns that have blackened into shadow. Inside, coals glow like a captive constellation. The room smells at once of hot metal and sap-bitter smoke. Heat shivers the air above the lid. There is a practiced choreography to this. The servant lifts the coverlet and slips the pan between the linens, moving it as if rowing a shallow river steady, even strokes so the cloth does not scorch in one place. A hiss, a sigh, a puff of steam as thin damp, invisible by day, becomes a ghost against the lamplight. The sheets that a minute ago could have been slate soften into something human. The pan travels the length of the bed, foot to knee to hip, then back again. skimming the edge where the sleeper's ribs will lie. Linger too long and you brand your master with an oval of ruin. Hurry, and you may as well have warmed the corridor. Good servants get this right by feel, by the language of heat spoken through a stick and a sheet. Some pans open on a hinge, others are simple shallow dishes capped with a dome of punched brass. The handle is long enough to keep hands out of danger, but short enough to wield in tight chambers. Its end is often wrapped in leather, shiny with use. Wealth declares itself here too. A plain iron bed iron in a modest house, a polished piece with chased vines in a great one. But wherever you find it, the tool serves the same quiet miracle, trading a few minutes of fuel for the luxury of not flinching when your body meets cloth. There are rules. The fire must be treated like a guest who could burn the house down if offended. Coals are drawn from the hearth with tongs and settled into a little nest of ash so they do not spit. The lid is shut, then cracked a finger's width to feed the glow without letting a sparks leap. The pan must never rest. It must glide. And when the bed has been walked with fire, the pan goes to the hearth side and is opened away from rushes and curtains. Because one stray ember on a winter dry floor will teach the household a lesson it never wanted. The household accounts make them sound ordinary bed warmers, as if they were as dull as a stool, but they were talismans of kindness in a stone world. The steward notes one for the mistress's chamber, another for the nursery, perhaps a third kept in the solar for afternoons when the Lord dozes in a chair. In smaller homes, the same effect is contrived with whatever will hold heat. A glazed stone bottle filled with hot water and wrapped in cloth. A brick baked at the hearth and slid into a sack. A pot of embers nested in a wooden footstove that can sit beneath the bedclothes like a small brazier. If you lack brass and hinge, you improvise. Warmth is a democracy whenever invention is allowed. Risk shadows every method. The best stories about warming pans are funny because the worst are not. Someone nods off, pan tucked at the foot, and wakes to quilts starred with holes like mothwork done at lightning speed. A drunk traveling gentleman insists on keeping the pan by his calves and kicks the lid loose. In the morning, there's a tale and a scar. If there's a morning at all, the safer practice is to withdraw the heat the instant the sleeper enters. But safety in winter is always a negotiation. There is a reason some houses keep a bucket of sand beside the bedside stool. Scent is part of the rite. A pinch of herbs, rosemary, lavender. Thyme may be crushed between finger and thumb and scattered among the coals. Not so much for medicine as for memory. The sweet smoke threads into the sheets and lingers until morning, a green grace note against the base of tallow and wool. In some rooms, the smell is clean. Beeswax chambermaids have rubbed the bed curtains with a thin dressing that stiffens them against drafts and makes the fabric catch light in a sober gleam. When warmth and wax meet, the bed smells faintly of hives and summer fields, a kind of alchemy you can believe in. Not every place trusts a pan. In the high north and in rugged halls where timber is dear, a basket of river stones sits near the andirons, soaking up the day's fire. At night, the smallest are wrapped in linen and buried at the bed's foot like tame comets. In other rooms, a leather pouch is filled with sand heated in a skillet. It pours itself to the curve of ankles and holds heat stubbornly. More loyal than brick, more obedient than ember, some kitchens send up iron shoe warmers, little lidded boxes, on short legs meant for feet under a table, but they end up, inevitably, as bed companions on the desperate nights when toes refuse to forgive. Watch the servant work and you see a craft of margins. She knows which linen has enough body to bear heat without blistering, which blanket hides a weak place in the weave, which cord of wool on the border will singe if the lid kisses it. Her hands are chapped from winter water, the knuckles blackened where the pan's soot grinds into skin. She has learned to listen, the tone of a hiss that means esteem, a sharper spit that means resin in a knot, the soft thud of coal sliding too far to one side. In great houses, this knowledge is written down as rules. In the small ones, it is taught knuckle to knuckle, by scold and by smile. There is an economy in all this. Fuel is counted in the steward's book with the same care as rents. A bed warming is a luxury that consumes what could be burned in the great hall where 10 people take comfort instead of one. So you time it. You warm the bed at the last practical moment when the coals are still lively from the evening's business and have not yet been banked under ash for the night. If the house is thrifty, the same pan visits 3 chambers in a ladder of speed. The ladies, the masters, then whatever room holds the infirm or the infant. By the time the servant reaches the 3rd, the heat is gentled, good enough for little feet, safe enough not to scorch a cradle quilt. For the sleeper, the change borders on magic. You slide a hand beneath the top sheet and find not the iron chill of fabric, but a pocket of living air. Your calves meet something that seems to breathe. You curl your toes, and they do not flinch. You lie back, and for a minute, the world forgets it's a stone. The feeling will fade. The castle takes back what is yours by degrees, but first, comfort blunts the mind's bristling and lets sleep find you before the cold remembers your name. There are houses where all of this is declared nonsense, romance, extravagance. Men who say a cloak is cloak enough and prove it by snoring in chairs. Women who say better to save wood than sheets, 'cause they alone must mend what fire has kissed. In such rooms, an ember pot or a stone is concession. The brass pan stays on a hook as decorum, a badge of gentility never risked. In others, the ritual is unskippable, as grace before supper. A pan neglected is a small sin weighed against 6 hours of penance under freezing linen. Beyond the bed itself, the warming pan brigade performs other rescues. They pass a pan over the bench where an old man sits to unlace his shoes, or under a child's blanket when fever shakes small bones, or beneath the skirts of a bride shivering in the corridor. Before she makes a walk she will remember forever for the wrong reason. They warm stones for the dog's palate and towels for the midwife's hands. In the long winters, the tool becomes a kindness engine, a way of spending heat where it buys hope. There is one last sound to learn, the little gasp that escapes your throat when warmed sheets meet cold skin, the involuntary astonishment of mercy. You feel it at the ankles first, then up the shins, then along the spine as you draw your knees to your chest, cheek pressed to linen that holds the faintest print of leaves punched through the pan's lid. The curtain falls to, the cap settles over your ears, and the night closes like a book around a ribbon. Outside, wind gnaws the tower. Inside, the bed keeps, for a while, what the pan gave it, just long enough to carry you across the narrow bridge between waking and sleep. By morning, there will be the familiar evidence, a pale oval on the sheet where heat drew out the last of the night's damp, the faint shadow of a soot against a hem, the servant's cleaned pan hanging cool from its nail, lid open like a yawn. The ritual will begin again at dusk, measured in coals and caution, in the arithmetic of kindness learned over centuries. Because in a castle, comfort is never permanent. It is made on purpose in small, bright minutes, and the warming pan is the tool that turns those minutes into a passage to rest. You've barely settled, lids growing heavy in the candle glow, when the mattress dips at your shins and a compact weight nudges the blankets, a damp nose presses against your ankle, then a slow, satisfied sigh. The night's most dependable hearth has arrived on 4 paws. In castles famed for draughts and a stone that drinks heat, a hound is not ornament. It is central heating with a heartbeat. You can picture the scene 100 times over, the last embers cupped in the grate, curtains breathing with the wind, and 2 or 3 dogs, one curled tight as a sleeping fox at your feet, another sprawled lengthwise along your calves, a third wedged against your hip like a warm shield. Call it practicality disguised as affection, or affection practiced into necessity. Either way, bodies keep bodies alive, and the first bodies most lords trusted for the job were their dogs. Every household had its breeds and its lore. Greyhounds and lurchers kept to the day, sleek lines made for speed and fields. At night, they tried to fold themselves smaller, draped across toes as if apologizing for their length. Mastiffs stretched like logs at the bed's end, guardians even in sleep. Their warmth and watchfulness a single offering. Little lapdogs, comforters, some called them, made a nest under the coverlet at the belly or in the crook of an arm, peeking out when the draught found a seam. Noble ladies prized these tiny furnaces as much as flowers or rings, and travelers wrote with amused envy about pillow dogs perfumed and ribboned, yet ferociously loyal to the business of keeping a winter night bearable. If you close your eyes, you can almost feel the tickle of their whiskers at your wrist, hear the small huff each time a coal in the hearth collapses and the room exhales another degree of cold. The practice was common enough that it hides in plain sight in records. Bequests: leave a little white dog to my daughter for the bedside, beside a string of pearls and a psalter. Household rules forbid kennel dogs, mud-footed, burr-matted, from the Lord's chamber, and then quietly add a line allowing the lady's comfort dog at will. In winter accounts, scraps set aside from the kitchen, offal, bone, crusts softened in broth, are listed with a clerk's dry hand as for the dogs that sleep by her grace. Even the language carries the truth. A hound might be named for the heat it offered. Ember, coal, pepper, warmth dressed in fur, given a collar and thanked with a pat. It wasn't just nobles. Down in cottages where the thatch trapped the smoke and the stars, a sheepdog or mongrel owned the same job description without ceremony. Children went to sleep counting ribs under a dog's coat and forgot them by morning. The animal's barrel of heat pressed against their calves. In long houses of the far north, cows and goats stalled under the same roof made the floor itself a radiating plate. Travelers preferred the stable to an unheated room, not from low taste, but from high sense. There are nights when the smell of hay and hide and the steaming breath beats a stone and tapestries without contest, and those who have lived through such weather learn the arithmetic of life quickly. Of course, letting dogs in the bed came with a price. Hair gathered in the weave of the linen, fleas declared the bed a market square. Bones turned up under blankets with a sudden clack and a smell that could spoil anyone's temperament. There's a scold in every household who vows the animals will sleep outside. And there's a night in every household when that vow is dissolved by frost. Better fleas than frostbite, someone mutters while lifting the coverlet with a sigh. Pragmatism wears a dozen faces in winter, and none of them is proud. Etiquette wrestled with necessity. The great houses codified where animals could go. The reality was decided by the weather and by people's private tenderness. A huntsman's hound might be forbidden in the solar and appear there nightly regardless, because the huntsman himself was tasked to be up before dawn and needed toes that could still wiggle. A lady might speak primly of the nuisance of hair on fine linen and then reach, by reflex, to tuck a small spaniel under her ribs. Servants, those who had the coldest corners, learned first what the nobility affected to learn later, that nothing warms feet like the steady engine of a dozing dog. More than one maid kept this secret heater despite rules, and accepted the risk of a scolding in exchange for a night without numbness. It's easy to make romance of it. the candlelit bed, the curved flank of a hound rising and falling in the dark, the human hand resting in fur as if on a second pillow. But there was more than softness at work. There was a strategy. Dogs choose the warmest points instinctively, and where they settle, air stirs gently. A small animal under the covers doesn't only radiate heat, it disrupts the layer of cold that clings to a sleeper's skin, muddling drafts and slowing the theft. When the bed is a microclimate, a dog is a weather system with pause. You can feel this in your own body. The first minutes after sliding in, before the pan's gift has canceled itself, when the shock of cold rice paper thin across your thigh gives way to the creeping mercies of shared heat. A dog accelerates that turning. Seconds feel like relief instead of penance. Within 5 minutes, your breath no longer shows white at the curtain's crack. The stories that cluster around the practice are half jests with sharp teeth. There's the groom who boasted that the frost could not touch him, so long as he had his 2-foot stoves. And the guest discovered at breakfast he meant a brace of sturdy terriers. There's the elderly prior who allowed no animals in the dormitory by daylight, but reinterpreted the rule after Compline for the sake of the brethren's toes. There's the young page who crept his whippet into the barracks and was found out, not by hair on the palates, but by a long yawn that belonged to no baptized boy. These are not just jokes about rule breaking. They are admissions that warmth bends rules like willow. And then there's the phrase people like to say began in colder lands. Nights so vicious you measured them in dogs. One dog meant tough weather that could be borne. 2, the kind of cold that made old scars complain. 3, a night that set tails down for grandchildren. Whether the words are born in the Middle Ages or borrowed later and passed backward hardly matters inside the bed. What matters is the instinct they name to answer ice with life. 3 sets of lungs fanning the curtain, 3 pulses drumming, 3 small hearts that cannot go out while you sleep. Even the sounds belong to the ritual. The soft thud as a dog hops from the floor to the mattress edge and considers you through the dark. The grunt that says, "Here," more syllable than bark. The long exhale that empties a barrel chest into your shins. You might catch the remembered meadow in their coat, a ghost of grass and rain and yesterday's hunt, threaded now with smoke and wool and your own skin. In a room where everything is a stone and fabric and echo, this living smell is proof that the world has not all turned to winter. Not everyone loved the arrangement. There were guest rooms where an inlaid chest at the bed foot shooed animals with its mere presence. There were dowagers who slept over braziers rather than tolerate a whisker against the cheek at 4 in the morning. Physicians wrote sometimes that shared beds multiplied lice and coughs, as if the cold would respect a room arranged by a chart. But even those who frowned at paw prints on linen were known to relent for infants and the elderly. A lapdog is smuggled beneath a grandmother's quilts, a farmhouse collie permitted, on the worst nights, to wedge against a cradle like a fuzzy wall. Mercy has a way of invading bedrooms that lists cannot bar. Travel stripped the practice to its plainest truth. On the road, wealth falls away, and comfort is something you make with what is near. Inns filled their palates with strangers, and sometimes the stranger was a dog. Stables offered heat the upper chambers could not, and horses' bodies hummed with a sleep song that pilgrims came to trust. When a knight accepted a shepherd's blanket by a byre fire and woke with the sheep's head tucked against his hip, he learned a lesson he would not forget before the next siege. Warmth is not a luxury, it is kinship. So the mattress dips again. You fold your knees a fraction and let the new arrival adjust the mathematics of heat. Outside, the wind combs the battlements for a mistake. Inside, the bed becomes a moving map of a small sun's. The hot knot at your feet, the long cylinder of muscle at your calves, the bean-shaped constellation tucked against your belly. You feel your own blood answer theirs, slowing, deepening, staking a quiet claim against the stone. If you listen with the candle out, you can count the argument the body makes even in its sleep. One beat after another, it says, here is life, here is warmth, here is enough. Pull the curtain back from the noble bed for a moment and let your eyes travel beyond the chamber, across the ward, through the gate, and down the slope to the village lights winking in the dark. Two worlds go to sleep under the same winter sky, and the easy story says one lies in feathered comfort while the other shivers under patched wool. But winter has a way of correcting stories. If you follow the heat, real heat, the kind that clings to skin and doesn't flee at the first draft, you'll find the truth is trickier. Grandeur does not always make a room warm. Sometimes it makes a room vast. Start with the castle. Stone walls that deflect arrows also refuse to hug back. Chambers built for ceremony, tall, echoing, impressive to an envoy's eye, defy any single hearth to tame them. The Lord's bed is sumptuous. Yes, a carved frame, a canopy heavy enough to whisper when it moves. Hangings so thick they need 2 servants to part them. Down mattresses that list in inventories like treasure. There are warming pans and hot stones and fur coverlets whose names, like sable and vair, taste rich in the mouth, yet the air outside the curtain still cuts, and breath still ghosts white when the quilts are thrown back. Cold in a castle is architectural, structural, moral. It's part of the idea. Power announces itself in height and distance and volume, and none of those cuddle heat. Now walk the lane to a timber house with wattle walls and a thatched lid pressed down against the stars. The doorway leaks smoke, and when you step inside, your eyes sting and then adjust. The ceiling is low, rafters black with years of breath and the soot. The central hearth beats like a small sun. A single room makes no pretense at ceremony because there is no audience. Here, heat isn't aspiring to fill a hall, it only has to satisfy a box. A pot simmers, a bench remembers the day's bodies, a dog claims the warmest flagstone with native wisdom. There's no feather bed, only a straw tick. And yet, when the family pulls close, grandmother nearest the hearth, children in a fox tangle at the bed's edge, parents fitted like two spoons. Warmth multiplies until the air at least agrees to be kind. Smoke is the price, and everyone pays it with their lungs. But the exchange is clear. In a small world, fire wins. The contrast sharpens if you measure what each house can afford to squander. In the keep, fuel disappears by the cartload and still fails to lift the room beyond its circumference of glow. A dainty comfort survives, fur on the skin, feather under the shoulder, but the space remains an icebox with a spotlight. In the cottage, there is no spare log to keep a showy blaze roaring for the sake of a spectacle. But there's no need either. The volume of air is modest. The thatch, though smoky and damp, traps heat like a stubborn lid. The animals stalled at one end of the room are radiators under rope and hide. Cattle, the old joke runs, are the poor man's fireplace. Warm their breath with hay, and they will warm you back. It tempts you to say peasants slept warmer. Full stop. That's tidy and wrong. Nobles had what textiles could do better than any wall. Fine, thick broadcloth, fold until it shrugged off wind. Pile of fur with the nap turned toward the body. Linen soft with washing. They had ritual, too. Seasoned servants who knew how to bank a fire so it still spoke at dawn. A warming pan applied at exactly the speed that scorches neither sheet nor temper. A habit of moving the bed from grand chamber to small solar as the year turned. These arts matter. A castle can be taught to concede warmth in pockets, and those who know the choreography feel it first. But if you strip privilege down to air and timber, villages hold a different advantage: containment. In longhouses and byre dwellings that knotted humans to their animals under one roof, hot breath rose all night and kissed the thatch. A cradle could be set where cows dozed. A pallet might adopt the oven's discarded warmth. The only canopy needed was the thickness of the roof. The words comfort and closeness are not synonyms, but in winter they frequently met. When travelers were wise, they chose the stable over the cold guest room. A night softly steaming with animal heat often beat a tower with a view. It's fair to summon witnesses. There are litters with courtly amusement at the mean cottages that, despite their looks, were marvelous warm. There are household notes reminding stewards that the nursery should be kept nearer the kitchens in frost. For children love sleep best where the bread is baked. There are travelers who complain that they slept poorly in a noble tower for all the fur upon them, then confess that, in a farmhouse the night before, packed between strangers and smoke. They woke sweating. Each rider thinks he is only observing manners. In fact, he has described a law of physics. Does this make the peasant lucky? Hardly. A hut's warmth comes braided with other miseries. Smoke is a constant misery and a constant antiseptic. Clothes hang stinking and never come fully dry. Fleas are not a story, they are citizens. You fall asleep fast because the day has wrung you out, not because the mattress welcomes you. In the spring, a cottage can be the warmest place in the parish and still have the coldest larder. Winter eats different things in different places, nor was the castle unteachable. By the later Middle Ages, more houses within the walls turned small on purpose. Solars were not vanity, they were thermodynamics, upper rooms that caught the sun's angle and frog-marched heat upward from the hall below. Tapestries ceased to be only stories woven in thread. They became padded answers to a stone. Oak paneling fitted tight, trapped little pockets of air as a poor man's double wall. Doors were hung with cloth. Window slits accepted oiled cloth or horn to blunt the wind's ambition. All this does not make a keep cozy. It makes it survivable by craft rather than sheer nearness. Set the two beds side by side in your mind. The Lord's bed, high, curtained, perfumed faintly with beeswax, fur laid in layers that impress the eye and restrain the blood. Beyond the curtain, a draught that prowls the chamber like something with a mind, a fireplace that glows rather than warms, an echo that will not sleep. The peasant's bed, low, blunt, prickly with a straw that requires negotiation, blanket thick but scratchy, dog dead to the world at your feet, the air itself loaded, smoke, stew, wool, bodies, until it feels less like weather and more like broth. In one bed, luxury of materials, in the other, luxury of proximity. Ask which wakes warmer, and the answer changes with wind and family and firecraft and luck. Scholars pick at the question because it keeps giving them something to chew. Some argue that the sheer mass of textiles at the top of society wins the night. Others reply that cubic feet defeat cloth every time. It is not a trivial quarrel. It touches a social imagination, how we picture comfort, what we believe money can buy, whether opulence and ease are the same currency. The past resists letting us be smug. A boy in a cottage might laugh at a lord's chamber and mean it. A lady might pity a cottager's bed and be right, and also shiver an hour later for her pity. Perhaps the cleanest answer is not a verdict, but a method. People arrange their lives to bully warmth into staying a little longer. Nobles refined a space, shrinking rooms, thickening walls with woven forests, rehearsing evening rituals until they ran like liturgy. Peasants condensed bodies, family and animals folded into one breathing architecture, a house that understood its own warmth the way a hive does. Both put their faith in proximity to fire, to fabric, to creatures, to one another. Both were correct. So stand in the dark lane between keep and cottage and listen. The castle wind speaks Latin, big, formal, unbending. The village wind speaks in short words and leans its shoulder to the door. Inside each, a different answer to the same hard question burns and fades and is fed again. In the morning, frost whitens both thresholds. In the morning, life moves, coughs, stirs the embers, and begins the arithmetic from the top. If you must have a moral, take this. Warmth is not wealth's automatic child. It is a thing made nightly by hands and habits in grand chambers and low rooms alike, made of wood and wool and breath and will. You might think a bed, once planted in a noble chamber, took root, but winter teaches motion. In great houses, sleep migrated. Beds were not sanctuaries so much as caravans. Frame, ropes, mattress, hangings, and all rolled from one room to another as the year turned. The principle was simple and ruthless. Chase the sun in cold months, flee it in hot ones. A castle could not be warmed as a whole. It could only be negotiated in zones, and those zones changed with the light. Picture the first hard frost. A steward has already drawn up the winter list. The solar, smaller, higher, south-facing will be the Lord's sleeping place until spring. The grand chamber, impressive for ceremony, is surrendered to the cold. It will host audiences, not dreams. Servants swarm the bed like shipwrights. The carved posts come down with the clack of pegs. The rope lattice is loosened so the mattress won't fold on itself. Feather ticks are tugged into canvas slips to keep them clean. Straw sacks are beaten on the gallery rail until a confetti of chaff turns the air to gold. Tapestries are lifted with a grunt and a curse. Their weight, something you feel in your back for a week. Every piece of fabric moves with the bed, because warmth in winter is not just fire, it is a portable landscape of wool and fur. By noon, the new room begins to look inhabited. The bed's canopy lowers the ceiling by a hand's breadth. A chest settles under the window to catch the thin, slanting sun. A chair claims the corner near the hearth where the draft is least cruel. You can smell beeswax from the curtain lining, a haze of lanolin from the blankets, and the sharper scent of fresh oak where the pegs have been re-driven. The steward walks the walls with two boys at his heels, testing seams with a candle flame. Where the smoke bends, rags are stuffed, and in the stubborn gaps, moss is pressed in with a knife. By dusk, the room has learned your shape, and you have learned its sounds, the particular tap of a shutter in a north wind, the way the flue hums when the fire draws well, the little cold mouth near the door where night always tries to sip its way in. There were rules of thumb everyone knew by feel. South and East were winter friends. West was better at keeping afternoon warmth than morning light. North, in January, was a foe. Thick walls could store sun like a modest battery if you gave them a chance. Unshutter during the noon hour. Draw curtains before the light fails. Bank the fire hard so that a stone spends its hoarded heat at last watch. Household accounts from royal progresses read like weather maps. Because of this, beds and hangings shifted as readily as kitchen gear, following not ceremony but warmth. A chronicler notes, almost as gossip, that a king changed chamber for the cold's importunity, and the remark means more than pique. It tells you that even at the top, rooms were not thrones, they were tools. Not every keep could afford such choreography. Some had only 2 decent rooms with private hearths. Others were built for siege first and sun last. Their windows narrow and sullen on every side, but even there people learned small dances. In the worst weeks, the family might sleep in the outer room of the kitchens where the bake oven softened the air. Children were sent to the buttery loft. The residue of heat from the hall climbed and pooled beneath the rafters like a tame cloud. Porters and old retainers kept pallets close to door arches, where drafts were sharp but footsteps were constant, and the fire never quite died. A castle, for all its stone, was a living animal, heat rising, cold descending, air scudding along corridors, and you found its warm organs by instinct. Peasant houses did their own migrations on a humbler scale. In winter, everyone crept toward the hearth. Benches dragged closer until knees remembered the fire's bite. Mattresses pushed to the warm wall. Babies nested between mother and grandmother because nothing else insulates like breath. In summer, families climbed to lofts under the thatch where night air moved cooler, yes, but threaded with the sweet dust of hay and the dry whisper of mice. The logic matches the lords, stripped of pageantry, hours of sun, volume of air, thickness of roof. You sleep where heat lingers or where it passes, and you accept that the bed is not a shrine, it is a wagon, even if the wheels are imaginary. There were household superstitions that grew from practice and then hardened into ought. Do not sleep by a west window in a storm month. Do not let the bed face the door in the dead of winter. Your curtain will shake open like a mouth. Do not set the cradle upon a flagstone without a straw beneath, for stone eats infant's warmth. Hang the master's tapestry behind his headboard. It is not for show, but to make a false wall against the draught. These are not laws written in Latin. They are the physics of poor insulation, told in human scale. Architects, even then, chased solutions. Later builders punched larger window openings on the sunward side and pinched them on the windward. They stacked private rooms above the hall, not beside it. They stitched small passages to cut off the bellows effect that turns a tower into a chilled flute. You can see the evolution in the fabric of certain houses. A staircase added like a graft, a chamber squeezed into what had been a passage, a fireplace bored through a sulking wall with a lintel that knows it is a newcomer. Does it work? Sometimes, More often it moderates rather than cures. A room that was vicious becomes stern. A stern room becomes tolerable with effort. Warmth is almost never won. It is rented nightly. Letters make it feel personal. A Burgundian courtier complains that he lost his chamber to the frost, a phrase half theatrical and wholly accurate. A steward notes that a lady refuses the river-facing room because it takes the cold of the water in its bones. A visiting Italian, brave on his first day, insists on the tower for its view and then negotiates downward by the third night to a room with fewer angels painted on the walls and more heat in the stones. An English household book lays out the winter plan in clerk's hand. The king's bed removed to the second solar by the small stair, the nursery to the bakehouse chamber, the queen's tapestries to hang in the second solar and in the oratory against the river wind. It is logistics as tenderness. You can hear, under all of it, an argument about mastery. A castle arranges the countryside like a chessboard, but inside its own skin it bows to the sun. A cottage takes what it can from the fields, but around its humble hearth it becomes sovereign. Both know, intimately, the angle of light on a January noon and the precise time the shadow on the sill goes blue. Both are calendars built in wood and wool, and when the first lambs cry in the cold and the day lengthens like a held breath, both will loosen. The bed will migrate back toward windows that open for air instead of grudging light. Tapestries will be rolled and stored against moth and damp. The portable landscape of winter will fold and vanish, a tent struck after campaign. For now, though, you stand in the newly made winter room while a steward gives orders in a soft voice so as not to make the space feel new. The fire sounds right. The current billows once and settles. A dog noses the warmed stone at the foot of the bed and decides. Outside, ice grits under a porter's boot. Inside, there is a small victory, not comfort in the way we use the word, but competence. A room wrestled into service against the season. You will sleep here until the almond trees wake, and when they do, you'll carry your weather with you. The old bed taking the turn in the corridor like a ship rounding a headland, sailing for summer quarters where the morning light will be kinder and the orchestra of drafts plays in a different key. Stand at the window of a winter chamber and you'll learn more about medieval life in a minute than in a month of chronicles. The stone sill is cold enough to sting your palm. The timber shutter, heavy, iron-hinged, barred with a stout crosspiece, breathes a thread of air at every joint. You press your ear close and hear the long, thin whistle of the wind as it hunts for a way in. A castle could turn aside lances and stones. It could not turn aside drafts. The wall may be 12 feet thick, but the weakest part of that fortress was always the mouth cut through it to see and breathe and light a candle by. Glass, when it appeared at all in early rooms, was a status, chapels first, oratories next. Sometimes a great chamber, if a lord was either rich or vain enough to want sermons of light marching across his walls. Even then, the glazing was in small quarries, leaded together like a net, and more beautiful than efficient. The vast majority made do with timber shutters. In summer, they stood open and the room filled with voices from the yard. In winter, they closed, and still the frost came. Households learned a compromise: tack a skin across the opening by day to catch a dim, honeyed light, drop the shutter at night when the wind rose, and pray the bar didn't warp. Not every skin was the same. Linen steeped in oil went translucent like old parchment and shrugged away the first sting of rain. Waxed cloth stiffened with a sweet smell, admitting a gentle amber that turned faces golden but never warm. In some places, thin slices of horn, scraped until light could find its way through them, were set into wooden frames. They didn't crack the way cloth did in hard frost, and they kept out the worst of a squall. You looked through such panes as though through breath on cold glass. The world was there, but softened as if the snow fell in a dream. The expense, the fiddly craft of it, kept horn for favored rooms. Elsewhere there were shutters and the will to stuff every treacherous seam. That became a ritual of evenings. A servant with a candle traced the edges of the window, watching the flame lean toward the gap like a dog that has caught a scent. Where the flame bent, rags went in; where rags failed, moss; and where the frame itself had shrunk away from the stone, clay was thumbed into the crevice and scored with a fingernail so it would dry without cracking. In some houses, a wedge of felt was nailed along the meeting edge of double shutters, crudely elegant weather stripping centuries before the word existed. And still, by dawn, there would be a line of crystals along the sill, a lace of hoar on the shutter's inside face, where the room's breath had met the night and lost. The window was architecture's confession. Arrow slits had been honest about their purpose. Cruelly narrow, flared inside so an archer could work, meant for war and little else. Later domestic openings, the embrasures where people would eventually sit with a book or sewing, were compromises between defense and comfort. They widened, admitted light, and with it drafts multiplied like stray dogs. Builders learned the game as best they could. Face the larger openings to the south and east. Keep the riverside mean and tight unless you like the cold of water climbing into your bones. Thicken the reveals so the wind must make a maze of its journey. None of it ever made the room warm. It made it survivable. Peasants played the same game with cheaper pieces. Many cottages had only shutters over narrow slits. Some stretched animal bladder or scraped hide over a frame to admit a shy glow and keep the worst of the weather out. On nights when frost climbed the inside of the wall, such coverings rattled and stiffened until they sounded like drumskin when tapped. Families stuffed tow, straw, or wool into the corners and hung any spare cloth they owned from pegs around the opening, creating a rumpled curtain that trapped a spoonful more heat. If anyone had old sacking, it was nailed to the shutter's interior like a quilted promise. The result was ugly and effective enough. Fewer tears in the eyes at night, less ice on the wash basin come morning. There is a kind of music to winter windows that every medieval household knew. Hinges talk, a long, slow groan as the iron shrinks and swells. The latch clicks like teeth. The shutter, if the wind has its way, drums once and again until someone rises to set the bar. When the moon is up and the sky is pale with a snowlight, the crack between shutter and frame paints a blade of silver on the floor. You do not need to see the outdoors to feel it. The room itself begins to behave like weather, a delicate eddy around your ankles, a winter river flowing along the stones, a tide of cold that comes and goes as the gusts decide. And yet you cannot deny the beauty. Bed curtains drawn, you open the shutter 2 fingers' breadth. The world out there is blue as milk, the courtyard a saucer of frost. A branch throws its lace along the wall. Your dog's ear catches the moon and shines. You will pay for this with cold at your back. But for a minute, you allow the night inside because it sweetens the room. Many did that, pilfered a sip of beauty from the window like stolen wine, then barred the shutter again and burrowed under the wool, pleased and punished at once. Debates about how common certain fixes were, horn panes, oiled cloth, even glass quarries in private rooms, miss the truer a story, which is the feeling in the hands that lived with them. To unlatch a shutter in January, you pressed your thumb into the iron until it stung. To refasten it, you braced your shoulder against timber, swollen with thaw or shrunk with a cruel dry wind. To seal it, you found yourself working with household scraps. The hem of a ruined shirt, a twist of moss scraped from the north wall of the yard. The record books register materials. The body remembers effort. Windows were never just openings. They were tasks. The higher you slept, the sharper the lesson. Towers sounded noble until the wind made a flute of their stairs. Guests learned quickly that the chamber with the view cost you your sleep. Air up there moved freely and cruelly, and even a good fire drew too well, drinking the room's warmth up and out like a thirsty thing. People joked about the pleasure of lofty sleeping, as one jokes about a friend's bad habit, with fondness and a touch of spite. A peasant in his low hut might envy a lord his hawks and his wine. He did not envy a tower room in January. Later centuries would make more of glass, little forest green panes spun or blown, caged in a web of lead and proud as jewelry, but the problem remained. An elegant sieve is still a sieve. Even beautiful windows leaked. A wise household treated them as both gift and hazard. Curtains were not ornaments. They were weather, pulled across a stone to make a false wall of wool. If you could afford to line them with waxed linen, you did. If you could not, you overlapped them and weighted the hem with a pebble sewn into the cloth. A child might be sent to sit in the embrasure at noon because there, for an hour, the sun made a warm pocket for fingers and bread. By vespers, the pocket was gone. There were clever, homely tricks that never make it into accounts because they were too ordinary to write down. A rushlight set on the sill warms a patch of cloth just enough to stop it stiffening. A pot of hot water put on a stool under the window takes the bite from air that falls like rain. The dog's palate kept beneath the embrasure turns him content, and, by consequence, keeps his body heat at your ankles. All of it a trade, fuel for a degree, labor for a draft, tamed for an hour, and always the morning verdict. If you had been greedy and left a crack for beauty's sake, the room told on you. Frost flowered on a stone in delicate ferns where your breath had met the night. The basin held a skim of ice that you broke with a thumbnail and then hissed at. Curtains were crisp at the edge, a brittle fringe that crackled as you drew them back. None of it meant failure. It meant a house in a climate before machines, where cold is not an intruder so much as a roommate who pays little and demands much. Stand again at the window with your palm on the sill, and you can read the day in the stone. Sun has weight here. When it touches the inward face for an hour in late morning, the room eases. When it misses entirely, you live closer to your fire and speak a little less. The shutter will go back tonight. The cloth will be tacked. The moss will be pressed in with a blunt knife. You will sleep under wool and hear the hinge hum like a low string when the wind plucks it. If you are lucky, the crack will throw a harmless sort of moonlight across the floor, and not the knife edge of a real draft across your neck. Either way, you will have made your peace with the window as every medieval household did, by treating it not as a picture frame, but as a balancing act between the eyes and the skin. Let in enough world to remember you are human. Keep out enough winter to wake alive. You approach the hearth with the confidence of a modern who believes flame must mean warmth, and the hearth answers with medieval honesty. It will dazzle you, feed on forests, perfume you with a smoke, and still leave your back cold. Fireplaces in castles were magnificent mouths, deep, high, and hungry. They were designed to draw smoke up and out, and draw it they did, along with the very heat you begged them to keep. The wider the throat, the stronger the draft, the stronger the draft, the faster warmth fled. You could roast an ox in some of these chimneys and yet feel a winter in your bones a dozen paces away. Household accounts complain like ledgers with chapped hands. Oak, ash, beech, carted by the wagon load, bundled again by boys with numb fingers, stacked in yards that shrank like a bank emptied at war. A week of grand hospitality could strip the woodpile to its knees. A month of siege weather did the same without the singing. One French lord, a sour with the arithmetic of comfort, wrote that his roaring hall ate the grove as a mailed man eats bread. You hear the truth in the rhythm of such lines. Heat came dear, and still the geometry betrayed you. Sit in the glow and your face prickled. Your shins grew rosy, your palms steamed as if they could sweat fire. Turn away and cold licked your spine like a cat that has been waiting for the chance. The room remained a sea, and the hearth an island. Everyone learned to navigate by that little continent of flame. Chairs crept closer, benches rotated like slow planets, so each side could have its turn at the sun. A child, forgotten for a moment, would inch up until a parent hissed and hauled him back. The smell of singed wool announcing he had crossed into danger. The clever tinkered, iron firebacks, heavy plates, cast or forged, stood at the rear of hearths to throw heat forward, their surfaces stamped with beasts or blazons that glowed ruddy when the flames ran high. Tiles, earthenware or glazed, lined the floor and sometimes crept up the jambs to hoard a little warmth and pay it back as the night rubbed on. Fires were banked low at bedtime, ash drawn across coals like a quilt to keep a red heart alive until dawn, all useful, all partial. Fire never stopped being a bargain struck with loss. Peasants fared differently and, in one crucial way, better. Their cottages gathered around a central hearth, the smoke hole above as crude as an open throat. The space was small, the roof low, the fire unpretentious, and the heat had nowhere grand to escape to. It soaked the rafters, hung in the thatch, spread out in the company of bodies, bulls, and beasts. Warming a castle chamber was a gesture. Warming a one-room house was a fact. You paid for it? Of course. Eyes watered, coughs became a season. Clothes took the scent of char and sheep fat and kept it, but at least the air near the floor could forget to bite. Smoke was not a byproduct. It was a roommate. Chimneys, when present, were simple brick throats or bells of masonry that pulled like a lung and then sulked when the wind changed. Smoke barbed you for that insolence. It rolled out, made a fog that turned walls to caves and turned breathing into work. It found tapestries like a lover and never let go, darkening saints and hunters alike until the weaver's colors spoke through a veil of gray. Women cursed ruined veils and men cursed ruined throats. Everyone washed black water from their faces and called it normal. In monasteries, where charity had to share a space with austerity, the brothers lay in dormitories that knew smoke intimately. The rule might forbid fires by beds, but the calefactory, the warming room, existed precisely because a stone and prayer were a hard match in January. Monks wrote piously about the soul's furnace. Their red-rimmed eyes and winter coughs wrote a grimmer commentary. In cottages without chimneys, the smoke rose and softened at the rafters, tarring the thatch, discouraging insects, preserving timber in the way a slow poison preserves a body for a terrible while. You can say it saved roof beams from beetles. You cannot say it saved lungs. What you smell now is a palimpsest, oak sap, damp wool, last night's stew, the faint sweetness of beeswax if a candle can be spared, the sour tallow if it cannot. Soot makes a film on everything that breathes. Servants whitewash walls with lime not only to brighten winter, but to reset the room's skin, to pretend for a week that the season has not left fingerprints. The whiteness holds until the next storm bullies smoke back into the chamber and writes the same black script along the beam. None of this stopped people from treating fire like a sacrament. They circled it, spoke to it, and trusted it with their sleep. A good fire learned the house how much oak to stand up against a north wind, how many faggots to feed the hour after midnight when every heart dips. There were night watchers of flame, a kitchen boy charged to keep embers living, an old aunt who woke by habit in the small hours, and I stirred coals with an iron like a priest lifting a host, a monk whose vigil happened to be the moment the calefactory's heart needed tending. The rhythm of segmented sleep. First a slumber, waking, second a slumber, fit neatly around a fire's needs. And so medieval bodies learned to stretch the night like a net across two poles of heat. So many small technologies grew from this dependence that they look like superstition to eyes accustomed to thermostats. A pot of water set near the grate made a steam to soften the throat. A kettle left just off the boil promised a cup of posset at waking. A row of flat stones leaned by the andirons all day, so that, wrapped in cloth, they could travel to the foot of a bed like emissaries of the sun. In great houses, warming pans went back and forth between hearth and mattress, hissing and purring as trapped air gave way. In meaner ones, a brick drawn from the ashes did the job, its dust a badge on the sheets that nobody minded. Fuel itself educated the tongue. Hardwoods burned hot and slow, softwoods spat and sang and burned fast. Turf or peat were cut and dried, gave a sweet, earthy smoke that colored the mind of a district as surely as dialect did. Charcoal heated with less smoke, which made smithies bearable and cooks grateful when a sauce wanted attention rather than ash. But charcoal took wood twice, once for the making, once for the burning, and so it belonged to work more than to sleep. Winter insisted on bulk. The chimney's voice became weather. On a night when the wind found the flue and played it like a long horn, sleep bent around its moaning. When a high pressure sat over the countryside and air grew heavy, smoke idled and pooled, and eyes stung before prayers were said. People learned the signs, a gust in the throat of the chimney and sparks feathering up closed the screen and pulled the settle near. Smoke wandering and listless cracked the shutter, a span to tempt a draught, stuffed the gap with cloth after. You didn't need a barometer, you had soot. Stand at the boundary where the circle of heat fades. Here is the truth of that era's physics. Comfort is local. The tapestries on the far wall look like they ought to be warmed by the same blaze that paints them, but they are cold to the touch. The bed that looms so confidently at the chamber's center might as well be a tent pitched on frost, unless it makes its own weather with curtains and bodies. Fire doesn't fill a room, it grazes it, and yet think of the human mathematics achieved with that small geography. A bench set crosswise in front of the hearth becomes a two-season machine, faces warmed, backs sheltered from drafts. A stool tucked under a stiff knees lets old bones linger by the blaze without choking off circulation. A woolen hood drawn up over a nightcap saves the heat your body's furnace throws off fastest. A high-backed settle creates a windbreak so convincing that within its curved wings a child may feel summer while a snow needles at the shutters. None of this is romance. It is engineering. You learn, living with such fires, to be grateful in increments, grateful for the minute your stockings stop feeling like wet paper, grateful for the one side of your face that glows because it has remembered blood, grateful for the way the dog rotates in his sleep so that his warm flank meets your cold ankle as if by pact, grateful even for the smoke's rough hand when it means there is fuel enough to make a nuisance. In this age, warmth is never a room's condition. It is a temporary achievement, a thing you keep by attention. So you edge away at last, carrying what heat your skin can hoard, and cross the chamber as a deaver carries breath. By the time you reach the bed, the glow you borrowed will have thinned to a thought, but the thought matters because it keeps you gentle with yourself and with the others who share the night. Somewhere below stairs, a boy curls near the ashes because the ash is warmer than the straw. Somewhere in the yard, a groom sleeps in the stable between two horses, an unglamorous paradise. Somewhere in the village, a cottage roof sighs out smoke that the stars polish to silver, and inside that smoky heaven, a family is fed and the first sleep is beginning. Dawn is the treaty that ends the long siege. It comes quietly, not with trumpets, but with a gray seam at the shutters, a thinning of the dark, a softening of breath, across 1,000 rooms, across keeps and cottages, travelers' lofts and monastic dormitories. The same movements repeat. Blankets bunch and fall. A hand slips from under linen to test the air. Someone coughs. Someone murmurs a prayer. Someone who rose in the night to bank the coals stirs again to coax them from red to orange. The castle wakes like a great animal, all lungs and joints. Timber settles. The flue clears its throat. Hooves stamp in the stable, sending up steam that catches the first sliver of light. In the noble chamber, the bed curtains open with the sound of thick cloth drawn over a rough beam. Frost has escalloped the leaded sill. The basin is a shallow lens of ice. A servant arrives, cheeks raw, carrying a small brazier and a jug warm enough to persuade the surface to break. She moves at a practiced pace. Logs to the hearth, kettle near the hook, shudders eased a finger's breadth to tempt a draught. The gap is stuffed again with rags once the flame stands up to speak. This is not luxury, it is choreography. Everywhere, the early steps of the day are the same steps that kept the night survivable. Below, the great hall wears its scars from the evening, drifts of ash, a scatter of bones in the rushes, a bench tipped where someone slept as near to coals as boldness allowed, dogs stretch and shake, a pot is set to pottage, the first mugs of a small ale arrive warm enough to quiet the shiver in a groom's hands. In the bakehouse, the oven still remembers yesterday, giving out a ghost of heat that an old woman turns into blessing, leaning her back to the bricks and sighing like someone in a church. In the cloister, a bell composes the air. The brothers form their line, breath white in the winter walk, eyes still fish-belly tired from smoke and prayer. Night has taught them again what the day will now collect, that a castle, for all its swagger, is not a hearth. Warmth here is made, not given. The architecture that bristled so brilliantly against armies bristles just as effectively against comfort. So people learned to redraw rooms within rooms. They stitched winters of their own, tapestries for walls, panels for stone, a high-backed settle to hold a pocket of weather, a bed that remembered tents and a spun microclimate from curtains. They migrated inside their houses, chasing sun in January and shade in July, treating chambers like pastures, occupied when the season was kind, abandoned when it turned. Textiles did as much engineering as a stone. Linen cooled, wool held, fur trapped. Together they made a latitude. A mattress might be a straw and a squeak with every turn, or it might be feathers and swallow a body whole, but either way, it lifted you off the stone, out of the coldest layer of air, into the range where breath could do its work. A warming pan gave you 10 merciful minutes. A wrapped brick gave you an hour at the feet. A hot cup gave you a small sun in the chest. Candles were both light and tiny stoves. Useful, dangerous, indispensable. Almost nothing solved the cold. Enough things shortened it to a tolerable sentence. Class played its usual game of trade-offs. The Lord owned forests and could strip them bare to feed chimneys that gulped heat as readily as a smoke. The peasant owned one room that held warmth because it had nowhere grand to go. The noble bed bulged with down and fur, and yet breathed air that smoked in front of his face. The cottage bench by the fire pinched hips and knees, and yet could be truly warm. On the road, inns squeezed strangers together in a straw, some with dogs between them and a stable on the other side of the wall. Discomfort was democratic. Ingenuity was everywhere. Children and the old lived on the edge of that ledger. Families reorganized space around them without a ceremony. Cradles drawn near the oven. Grandmothers given the settle's inward-facing seat. boys flopped like kindling on pallets in the kitchen loft, where heat rose and remembered them. Healers wrapped feet in warmed oil and handed out possets under a theory of humors that was part medicine, part hope. The rest of the household added the other half of the prescription: body heat shared under honest blankets, a dog at the toes like a small, loyal furnace, a sprig of juniper on the headboard, because warmth is also the absence of fear. And always the rites: shoes turned, charms hung, saints named, shutters cracked, gaps stuffed. Practical or not, each act carried temperature. A ritual is a kind of blanket fabric for the mind. It gathered the room to a smaller, braver size. Even the feasts were engineering, a whole house filled with bodies and breath, the great hall becoming, for a few hours, the one room the fire could almost conquer. Even the interrupted night made sense when you saw that first waking as a maintenance window. Check the fire, move the stone, change the sleeper's geometry in the bed. The medieval day began, in truth, at midnight. We like to think we rest. They camped. That is the right scale. A bed was a shelter within a keep, as a keep was a shelter within a wind, and each layer needed its own ropes and pegs. What survives, reading their letters or walking their halls, is not a picture of misery, but of attention. Comfort was not the default mode of a building. It was the outcome of human will, of hands that learned how high to hang a curtain or how closely to scatter rushes, of tongues that learned which cup best warms and which a story best shrinks the dark. Stand beside them a moment longer in the gray before the sun decides. A servant rattles a fire back into place so the heat will come forward instead of upward. A monk pulls his cowl and breathes through cloth to temper the bite. A child, half asleep, jams cold feet under a hound's ribs and earns a grunt and then forgiveness. A rider in an inn yard throws a saddle blanket over his shoulders and laughs at his own breath, shocked every winter as if it were new. The day runs its thumb along the edge of the world. Roofs shed last night in a sift of white. This is the point when history can turn didactic, where we could scold ourselves for thermostats and sealed panes and the way we have forgotten the cost of firewood. But that is not the tone the morning invites. Take recognition instead. We are warm by design because they were warm by work. The things they invented under duress, layering, zoning, moving with the season, making microclimates, sharing heat, are the same principles that sit quietly inside modern systems and family habits. Our technologies speak their grammar, our comforts echo their solutions at a scale they could never afford. When the sun finally breaks and lays a blade of gold across the floor, the night's calculations slip into the ledger of day. The bed is stripped and shaken. The rushes are swept toward the door. A pan of ice is upended. A new pail filled. A child sent to fetch kindling. The chamber remains itself, stone, draft, distance, but it looks less like an enemy people made a place here again. They will do it tonight again, and the next, and the next. Not because the castle will ever be tame, but because the people inside it are stubbornly alive. So if you carried the exercise as asked, if you dimmed your own room, listened for boots on old stairs, let your breath fog in your mind, then you know what they knew. That winter is an empire and the sleep is a negotiated peace. No single trick held the line. Together they did. Textile and timber, ritual and ration, dog and drink, patience and prayer, an economy of small fires and smaller mercies. The walls remained cold, the world remained hard. The warmth that lasted was never in the stone, it was in the company. Night will come again, they will build it back in layers, in circles, in hands. And when they draw the curtains at last and the hearth shows its red heart one more time, someone will whisper something that sounds like gratitude, though it may only be breath. The truth is simple, and it is grand. The heat that mattered most was human.